All right, we are live here at MythVision Podcast. I have my guest, Jonathan MS Pearce, joining us again. Welcome back, Jonathan.
Thank you for having me. I am excited.
I am too. We're going to deal with the post-resurrection appearances with Jesus. We're going to go deep into this, and this might end up becoming a two-part video series. I don't know. Depends on how much time we spend in the first half dealing with certain arguments. But before we do, we have a special intro for you.
Oh, yeah.
We are MythVision. Welcome back to MythVision Podcast. We're going to be talking about post-resurrection appearances today with Jonathan MS Pearce. Before we get started, everybody, go get you a copy if you haven't yet. We are closing up. We're at the end of this book here, and this is the book here with the big question mark where Jesus would have been crucified. The Resurrection, a critical examination of the Easter story. Get you a copy. You can get a Kindle, paperback, and we're going to be delving into other works of his as well. The Nativity we started. We still got to finish this.
Yeah, that definitely needs some. Well, I mean, we've got most of the year to wait to bash that one out.
Absolutely. Your book before the book you have that's coming out, you write books like so quick and so many. Why I Am Atheist and Not a Theist. And you have many other books. So just go to Amazon. Down in the description, the link should be there, and get you a book. What's the book you have in your hand right now?
Well, I've got it. Yeah, it's just coming out. It is on.
You broke up? He broke up. Let's see what happened here. Jonathan will come. He'll come too. Let's see. Someone pray in the chat right now. Make this poor guy stop being frozen. Someone has the power. I'm fairly certain in the chat. Mr. Pearce, he's stuck. Did he look at the? Did he turn around and look when he shouldn't have? Is he a pillar of salt at this point? I'm beginning to wonder. Let's see what happened. Everybody in the chat, welcome. While we are waiting for him to become a non-pillar of salt and come back, I want to give a shout out to the first people who showed up. Moon Shoes, hello there. You have 1,000 myth coin, myth points, myth money, however you want to call it. Frank 500, hey, I made it early for one of the live shows. And Mo Myth Money, Reluctant Renegade, top 3, you got 250. So I am definitely giving away that myth money because, you know, it does exist and it can be cashed in, but only when you enter into the Platonic realm, when you're going to the pearly gates. You know, that's the only time it works. So anyways, Jordan, thank you for the prayer. No way. He's debating. What the heck? Is my timing off? I haven't done a live in like a week, ladies and gentlemen. So I'm trying to cover this amazing book that is a must read. I'm not kidding. This chapter is fantastic. So I really don't want to get started without him, but I almost want to read these quotes. But I feel like if he's not in the room with us and he's not witnessing this, then he can't be part of those who are witnessing what I'm saying. And then technically it would be a lie if you said that, you know, I appear to all of you in the same context. We're going to be dealing with the appearances of Jesus, of course, as well. So bad timing, Derek. Someone said bad timing. Well, I'd like to know how long did he have that scheduled out? I would be interested. Maybe he had it scheduled out for a while. I'm not 100% sure. Really bad timing, man, Bear Pig said. Yeah, I don't know. Apostate lies coming from me. No, there's a lot of good stuff in this book, man. I'm not going to lie. I mean, seriously, I really think he covers a lot of interesting ground. Let's go ahead and plug the rest of the stuff while we wait for him to pop in here. Other than his book, he has his website, onlysky.media. So go down in the description and you can check that out. I need to add that, actually. Let me post this in the chat. Oh, he's back. Huh. What happened? Did Satan just come and take you? What happened?
Something has never happened in my life using this laptop. It just froze. And then I think Jesus or Satan, or they're both the same, aren't they? Sort of deciding I shouldn't be part of this. But I am now. I'm back. Thank you for your patience.
Well, I just wanted to plug your website as well, where you're going to write articles.
Yeah. They're really excited about that. That's a whole platform devoted to giving a voice to the non-religious, particularly in America, but worldwide. I've just written that piece up there on Putin and what's going on in Ukraine. So I write about all sorts of things, from biblical exegesis to philosophy to politics. It's all part of my interest. And I was just going to bang on about this book because it's out this week. 30 Arguments Against the Existence of God, Heaven, Hell, Satan, and Divine Design. Really excited. Forward by Dan Barker. I'm really excited about that. It's a great, easy to read book. Loads of philosophical content, but hopefully easily digestible. It's on Amazon now. It's just filtering through. It might say unavailable because it's just filtering through distribution channels, but it's there. It's there for people.
Well, I do want everybody to help support the people I have on. Of course, I've got the Patreon. I've dropped some more stuff. I got to interview Mike Licona myself, and I told him, I was told that leave the debate up to Bart and Mike, and I'm not a debating type, but I wanted to try and get Mike to answer questions critically as a skeptic. And it was like pulling teeth from a 3-year-old who knows that you're going to pull his teeth. I must admit, very nice guy. Mike Licona is a very nice guy, but dude, at least Delcy Allison pretends to put on the skeptical glasses, and there wasn't a single thing he couldn't help me pretend if you said, Derek, what's the best argument for Jesus, his resurrection? I honestly, from studying this, would say Paul believed he really saw Jesus rise from the dead. He had some experience after. That would be my best argument. I would admit that in some way, Paul's experience caused him to believe he really saw the risen Lord. And that's a fair argument. That's not trying to dodge the question. That's a fair argument. But he couldn't. He ran to, well, if the evidence was like Islam, he went off into Islam. I'm not even kidding you. You got to watch it. It's on the Patreon.
You've got to understand there for apologists like Mike Licona, especially since he's been stung on the resurrection, particularly with the sort of Matthew's zombies. He lost a job over that. So
I talked to him about that on this episode, by the way.
Yeah, and so he's got two things going on. He's got his professional reputation and all of his base, because at the end of the day, he's also a business, I suppose. He's got people that buy his books, that buy into his ideas, and so therefore, if he says something is controversial, then he's endangering that. But also, such belief, I think, is a house of cards. Once you say, "Oh, this is a bit of," and openly admit this is a bit of a problem, then actually it all starts falling apart like a house of cards. So I think there's a lot of cognitive dissonance involved, but also a bit of professional protection.
Yeah, I agree. And that's why I asked him, can you talk about this? He's like, yeah, I can talk about it. So I don't want to get him fired, but I wanted him to be fair and mention, you have to watch that, of course. And I have other I've done some other stuff. Specifically, I've had the Patreon members who've helped support me. I've been asking their questions to Dr. Price. These are videos literally asking one person a specific patron's question. The same with this one here. I mean, that's stuff I do when I have the opportunity. This was an amazing interview with John J. Collins on the Felt Apocalypse. I mean, there's a lot of material that is not public that is on the Patreon, so please consider. I also want to go to Israel in October, trying to make this trip possible. If you want to help out, all of that is in the description. Enough plugging. Let's go ahead and get into this. This is an amazing book. Jonathan, let me ask you this. May I have the honor to read one of these quotes that are in the beginning of this, did you freeze again? Bro, did you freeze again? I think you froze. Someone in the chat is causing this to happen. It's got to be your fault. Like, just like the Israelites blame themselves for all the destructions that happen and the times they get conquered, it's your sins. This is what's happening, ladies and gentlemen. It's your sins that are causing him to freeze. Blame yourself. Oh, he's back.
I don't know what's going on. That was just the feed froze. My internet's fine. My laptop's normally fine. I mean, God, so I hope it doesn't happen again. So yeah, let's. Did you want to start out by reading? So the beginning of this section, the chapter that is on the appearances. There's a couple of really sweet quotes. One from Thomas Paine, one from Celsus or Celsus.
Yeah. Do you want me to read?
Yeah, go for it.
Which one do you want me to read?
Both.
Okay. I love this. The way you opened this chapter, I must admit, they cut through the baloney so smooth, like a hot knife through butter. And this is what Thomas Paine had to say in The Age of Reason in 1795. I think we could go back in time and learn a thing or two from him. The story of Jesus Christ appearing after he was dead is the story of an apparition, such as timid imaginations can always create in vision, and credulity believe. Stories of this kind had been told of the assassination of Julius Caesar not many years before, and they generally have their origin in violent deaths or in the execution of innocent persons.
So it's just sort of setting the scene that even then, even then, this was the beginning of higher criticism. You got this idea that actually were these just stories? These are the sorts of activities that we might expect after the violent death of someone who's well adhered to. Yeah,
and we see it as other examples like Julius Caesar. People were having visions and experiences there. And this is coming from Celsus on the True Doctrine, of course. This is written in 185 CE, circa. If this Jesus were trying to convince anyone of his powers, then surely he ought to have appeared first to the Jews who mistreated him, and to his accusers, indeed to everyone everywhere. When he was punished, everyone saw, yet risen from the tomb, almost no one. And that's Celsus. And he's got a good point.
Yeah, so I mean, I really wish we had Celsus's original stuff, but we only really have him through the early church fathers and whatnot. But I mean, there is an open admission as to early beliefs that were contrary. The counter arguments that existed from within the Jewish communities, and I think that's it's a really interesting idea that is this. So if you're a Christian and you believe in a resurrection and you believe all of these appearance accounts, you are believing that Jesus appeared to make a few people here, and some of his followers here, some of his followers there. Is that the best way to deliver your revelation to humanity? I mean, really. So when we talk about abductive arguments, which are arguments to the inference of the best explanation, we look at data. We say, does this best support atheism, or does this best support theism, and in particular this kind of theism, Christianity? Whereas, I would think that I think that the best data to support Christianity would be Jesus coming out and being pretty damned obvious about being a risen God man. Because at the end of the day, he's cutting off that revelation by only doing it to a few people and hoping that will turn into some kind of movement. Is to say, I'm going to make it a really difficult time for you to get your message out there to whole of humanity, when surely the goal is all of humanity entering into a loving relationship with God. It's just so already the appearance narratives are implausible, because this is a bizarre way for God to reach the most amount of people.
It would have been apologists take this route to kind of give an idea. They'll say, well, the Apostle Paul was an enemy. He was an opponent of the Christians, an opponent of Christ, and he converted. That must be miraculous. Really, though, what would have been even a better story, or if this was really history, would be to literally appear to the people who had him killed, to the actual people who did this and have them go, nah, like all of them, not some random dude named Paul who comes from a completely different region who had nothing to do with the original movement. Like, no, that would have been far more provocative. Even then, you still want to be skeptical and cautious because we're living in a superstitious era. But no, that doesn't seem to happen. And even the Roman soldiers at the tomb, we talked about this in previous episodes, they're not running around going, he's alive. No, they're like, all right, how much money are you going to give me to shut up about this? Yeah, it wouldn't. Like,
and we'll talk about that with the 500 appearance to the 500. It was like, what happened to them? Surely that's the most incredible thing all of those 500 people would have ever seen and experienced in their life and in the history of reality, right? And yet you don't hear from them again. Is that what we would expect given a theistic account or an atheistic account? And yeah, it's hugely problematic that these people aren't, we talked about this before, like you said, with the soldiers, but it's the same with the Egyptians down in with the Exodus. It's like they have 10 plagues against them, their entire army is destroyed, and their firstborns are murdered, and all their cattle are murdered, and they're like, yeah, we don't still believe. No, after it happens, they're like, they go back to their pagan beliefs, and like none of them convert. So it's all like, which thesis does that best support? The fact that the thesis that it's mythological, or the thesis that it's veridical, historically true?
mm-hmm.
And of course, I think the answer is obvious.
Yeah, I'm with you. And at best, if you were to try and take a position why he didn't show up to everyone, you might want to become like a Calvinist or some hardcore determinist. But then you have other problems that you have to try and swallow. Because then if I was a Calvinist, I go, yeah, so what? He chose only a few. Or like, but like God closes the door to make it so small, only a few numbers will make it in and everyone else is going to end up punished. And he obviously really doesn't want everyone to be saved because he's not actually appearing to give everybody that chance. You mentioned in this book, in the same chapter, talking about we're all Thomases. We should all be Thomases. And this is actually a quote taken from John Loftus, that we should all be Thomases, but even doubting the story of Thomas, because the whole intention of that story is to get you to go, hey, you doubter, stop doubting. Because Thomas was convinced, but you don't need to do what, like Jesus doesn't need to appear to you because here's your account for Thomas. No, be a Thomas, but doubt even Thomas's story. No reason to believe this is the case anyway. I mean, I don't hold on.
Several things going on with the doubting Thomas story is, and we talked about this in previous episode, which is a reaction against sort of Gnostic beliefs in the spiritual body resurrection. So this is say it's a body. Mm-hmm. But also it's a reaction against counter arguments, I would say, that Jews would have been saying, like Celsus, that these crazy ghost stories is like, they're not ghost stories because we've got a tomb and we've got people that saw it, and we've got Jesus resurrecting. It wasn't just a ghost because Thomas poked in, and so it's this kind of it's this argument that Jesus appeared in a very historical bodily sort of manner. That is acting as a counter argument. But also the doubting Thomas issue is a problem of epistemology, which is to say that, how do we know stuff and the unfairness of God. So if God, like here you and I are, Derek, 2,000 years later, and what do we have? We've got a 2,000-year-old book. Thomas was
less than that, but yeah.
Yeah. Thomas was one of Jesus's closest followers, right? Supposedly saw all these miracles, then sees Jesus resurrected and still doesn't believe, right? What chance do we have? He's had all that and still doesn't believe. And then Jesus goes, but don't worry, mate. Just poke my holes. And he got to poke his holy hands and then believed. It's like, but we don't get that. So there's an unfair distribution of evidence.
And when I say to a Christian, I like, if I was to be convinced, what would have convinced you, Derek? What would convince you? Like, something like that happened to Thomas actually happened to me, and I knew I wasn't tripping. I didn't hallucinate this. Like, there was a way to somehow verify that. I can't even pretend that if I had that experience, even if it was hallucination, I wouldn't be convinced by it. But I haven't even had that experience if it was a hallucination. You see what I'm saying? So if he appeared to me right now when we were off camera while I'm reading a book here in my office, and this happened to me, I can't promise I'd be skeptical of my own faculties and act like this is a hallucination. If I'm physically thinking I'm feeling his hands and he's saying to me, okay, has that happened to you? I see no good reason to think that this is true if you yourself have not experienced that. And I see people who actually in the comment section talking about, I saw Jesus in 1974. Like, these are people really in my comment section in my videos talking about, I know he's real. He has appeared to me. I've saw him face to face. I physically, he pat me on my shoulder. Like, and I'm saying to myself, I mean, Elvis probably drank tea and ate crumpets with some lady in Europe who loved him to death. I mean, and so therefore Elvis is really alive, or he really is. Anyway, we're going to get into this.
Do you want to get to some of your super chats already?
Yeah, if you don't mind. Thank you. Thank you so much for the support. I appreciate the super chat. Anthony, was Paul responsible for the Catholic Church's weird obsession with sex? Jesus barely talked about sex. I don't know if Paul himself, where Paul gets this doctrine from, but I would say he's a major proponent, at least according to the literature we have. It's really complex, because even in Revelation, there seems to be, and I don't know exactly where these Incretites get their idea, but the 144,000 Israelites are virgins, and they're better because they are virgins, and they're ready for war because they haven't been defiled with women. That's how it's viewed. So is that Paul rubbing off, or is this just some weird version?
So sex has a moral dimension to a lot of people, and therefore, when you're proclaiming a set of moral diktats, then they're good choice of word. Then there are going to be, ideas of sex creeping into that, and you see this throughout the history of the early church up to Augustine and so on and so forth. Sex is thoroughly, embroiled within trying to find its place in society, within ritual and in our moral disposition. So yeah, I don't know enough about Paul's. I haven't looked into Paul and sex that much. I can't answer that with any specifics.
Yeah, it depends on where you're looking to. Some of the letters may have been written in his name, but he didn't write them, or something to this effect in the 2nd century, and they're counteracting against Christian possible missionaries or women who are ruling their own churches, whatever. Doc Pluromana, thank you for the super chat. In Luke, Jesus first appears to the 2 disciples walking to Emmaus, but once in Jerusalem, they find the 11 already blabbing. The Lord has indeed been raised. Man, TMZ had some fast-breaking Peter news. You go into this pretty deep in your section here.
So we'll come on to the Emmaus. I mean, not that particular point, but we'll come on to talk about Emmaus because it's a super important and interesting appearance narrative. It's theology and not history for a whole load of obvious reasons, in my opinion. But yeah, I mean, when you are creating a narrative 50 to 85 years or whatever dating you want to do, a long time after the events, kind of, you don't need to sort out those finer details. So as long as the stories have some kind of significance, then you've won that.
Dating is something I brought up in that Licona discussion of the Gospels, and he was trying to, he corrected me on a few things. No, most critical scholars do date Mark early, etc. And I meant, well, skeptical critical scholars. He goes, no, I know one who's an agnostic headed toward atheism before he died, Mike Licona said. And he said, and he thinks Mark was written in the 40s. And I was like, bro, and he tried to say like Litwa, Dennis, Steve Mason, like all of these views on Acts being written after 93 AD because they are aware of Josephus are fringe. They're on the fringe. But then he wants to mention this atheist skeptic scholar who's dating at Mark in the 40s as though that's not fringe. No. This is definitely.
But I think things that were seen as fringe maybe 30 years ago within the Christian community, scholarly community, I think that's changing now. I think things are a lot more open, and people don't feel like they have to adhere to things out of some kind of need to conform to the ideals of any particular institution or church organization. So I think we're living in an interesting time where we can evaluate data on their own merit, on its own merit. Right. And I think there are theories that were once fringe that maybe aren't so fringe anymore. And it's not because we just believe anything, but actually there's just much more of an open debate.
Yeah, I think so. Indo, thank you for the super chat. I've heard apologists say that 1 Corinthians Creed dates back to right after the resurrection, and we can trace people starting to preach to even earlier.
Yeah, so that there is definitely parts of Bart Ehrman talks a lot about this in How Jesus Became God, and about the chiasm of part of First Corinthians that is a pre-Pauline, or the theory is it's pre-Pauline, and the creed. He's drawing on that creed because the language is different to how he would say it, and it's arranged in a particular way, which I think, yeah, almost certainly, I'd completely agree with that. But you know, that doesn't necessarily have a lot to do with the resurrection appearances as a whole. But yeah, I'd agree that there is some pre-Pauline. He didn't make everything up, right? You know,
there was an interview done recently. I was there. I was an eyewitness, so you can believe my testimony. But seriously, I was hosting because I've been working with Bart Ehrman, and he's been doing a lot of lecture series. And I watched Paul Enns, or Paul Agia, interview Bart on this very matter that Gary Habermas, and this issue that occurred between Gary Habermas and Pine Creek Doug. And they had this tension and this discussion. And Gary was trying to use Bart and say, no, Bart Ehrman says pre-Pauline. And then Bart actually clarified what he was meaning by this. If you go watch that episode, he's not saying like, oh, this goes right back to the beginning. But there's a scholarly term for what is meant by pre-Pauline. And when we think pre-Pauline, we would think that means like way before Paul. But Paul's letters like are showing up in the late 40s. So if you're at least over a decade or more before something like this is maybe formulated at best, if they're believing they experienced something. And Bart's totally fine with thinking it didn't take, a month or two before they had these experiences. Someone is saying that they experienced something, and the movement continued. So,
but for something like a creed to develop, you do need time for rituals to develop out of those things. So the pre-Pauline content of the creed, I think, would have taken a good deal of time. A good number of years to
and Robert, just to throw it out there, Robert Price says this creed is late. He thinks this creed was not there originally. Of course, you have in your chapter here about this whole 500 issue. I know you're going to probably want to get into, but he thinks that the fact that it's not mentioned in the Gospels is evidence it didn't exist, because they would have used this 500 argument.
Yeah.
You see what I'm saying?
Yeah. So I think that's what favor, and we will come on to this, but that's what favors a copyist error. So I think it's referring to Pentecost.
Okay. Thank you, Indo. Polka, last one here. Is Paul's execution a questionable detail? Sounds convenient.
I'd leave that up to you. Any thoughts on that?
Honestly, I don't know enough about Paul's execution, this tradition. I know when I've read Richard Purvo in his commentary on Paul, he talks about, or on Acts, about Paul, because it's all about Acts already knows about his death, it seems, according to Richard Purvo, as he's read this commentary. And I know that Harold Attridge, who helped co-edit that, they walk away saying this author acts like Paul's invincible, but he's already gone. And so this seems to be what they're doing. Are you grabbing a book?
I was going to grab that book. No, that's all right.
No, flex on us, bro.
I think
flex on us. We have this tendency to want to grab a book to show you a text. It feels good.
That one?
No.
All right.
No, it's the commentary, the Hermeneia commentary on Acts.
Oh, right. Yeah.
But either way, I'm sure it mentions stuff like that anyway. All right. Thank you so much for the super chats. Appreciate the support. Continuing.
So, yeah, what I wanted to say about Paul, first of all, is that, well, really, I mean, it's worth having a look at 1 Corinthians 15, which is always the go-to, isn't it? 1 Corinthians 15:3, for I handed down to you as of first importance what I also received, that Christ died for our sins according to the scriptures, and that he was buried, and that he was raised on the third day according to the scriptures, and that he appeared to Cephas, then to the 12, After that, he appeared to more than 500 brothers and sisters at one time, most of whom remain until now, but some have fallen asleep. And he then appeared to James, then to all the apostles, and last of all, as to one untimely born, he appeared to me also. So a couple of things. First of all, this is only as good, like, is this evidence for appearances? So I've got a friend that lives around the corner. Now, she's had kind of appearance experiences of her dead grandmother. Right, they're olfactory experiences. She smells her, she has sensations of her. Right, she believes, I don't know if she still believes that she is an older person now, that they are veridical experiences, as in they are referring to actual data that's external to her mind. It could be smells that are triggering off sensations and all sorts, right? But so I'm telling you this now. Is that evidence for her having those experiences?
No.
Or for her having those veridical experiences?
No.
It's me telling you stuff, which is the weakest form of evidence for that, is effectively hearsay. What I'm trying to say is that this is effectively what Paul is saying here is effectively hearsay. He's providing no evidence to support these. This is just, here you go, here's a bunch of stuff. He's also throwing his own experience in with that, which might then lead us to infer that all of those are visionary experiences, rather similar to Paul's rather more visionary experience. So Paul had Jesus appearing to him after Jesus had ascended, and this was much more obviously a visionary experience. But if he's putting that in a list of appearances, then I think we've got good reason to think maybe that those other experiences could have been similar in their sort of makeup.
Yeah, I think that makes a lot of sense, and I think that fits the data better. I mean, every time we see an appearance, even in Acts, he's like, look, I see the Son of Man seated at the right hand. He's looking up. Are we assuming he's like getting off of his throne physically to come down here and appear to Peter, to appear to Jesus, to appear to these people? Or did he appear to them before he ascended on high? What is it doesn't give you a time lapse either on like when these people are supposedly experiencing this appearance and how that appearance is. It doesn't give us the data, though apologists love to go for the more conservative supporting their position views. Well, he had to appear to all 12 at the same time. We get into that, of course, and like no, he just says he appeared to the 12. It doesn't say how he appeared to the 12. We don't know if these were just visionary experiences individually at certain times, and each of the 12 or the totality of all of these followers of the early followers of Jesus are saying, hey, I had an experience as well. He came to me last night while I was eating my kosher bread before Sabbath or whatever, like we don't know those details, and that would help.
The fact that the appearance to 500 is, this is the entirety of the evidence for the appearance to 500. After that, he appeared to more than 500 brothers and sisters at one time, most of whom remain until now, but some have fallen asleep. That is it. So when you speak to a Christian, and when I had a debate with Jonathan McClatchy on Unbelievable recently, and we were debating miracles, but really leading up to the resurrection miracle, I pressed him on this. Is because, do you believe that? Because if you believe that, then your level of credulity is insanely low. If you're willing to believe a magnificent claim like that, that's completely out of the ordinary, on that level of evidence, which is so not out of the ordinary, then you are not justified in believing that. And the problem is, and we talked about this in a previous episode, but the problem is verifiability. Not only did so Paul is writing to the Corinthians here, they don't appear to want to verify the claims he's making, nor were they able to verify the claims he was making. It was just completely unrealistic. In other words, he can say anything he likes and there's no comeback. And then this gets written into kind of church knowledge of clearly what did happen. But actually, how do you know that? The travel was too expensive, very time consuming, and oftentimes dangerous, whether on land or sea. Mail in any conventional sense was practically impossible, certainly from strangers. Library access was incredibly limited and of little use to the potential Christian convert, and likely inaccessible. Given the near impracticality of foreign and distant travel from outside of Palestine or even from far more off places within, this leaves us with localized fact-checking. The skills of interrogating were not known, let alone implemented, especially given the in-group secretive nature world of the nascent Christian cultural sect. Such people would have really wanted to fact check and have been in a position to be able to do this at a personal and social level, would not have been able to do that. So the idea is that there's no ability to verify, and also there was no desire to verify, as we can see from Acts, because when they were told things in Acts, they believed them really, really, like extraordinary things. They believed them really, really easily. And then when they went to court in Acts, they actually ended up not believing them when they're actually challenged. So this is really weird epistemology going on there. But just basically, Paul can say what he likes, and he can get away with it because no one can fact check.
There's a lot of this going on. Just the doubting traditions make me also think that there's a kernel of truth early on, where some people are going, no, BS, man. No, like same thing we have happened with the Millerite movement. You know, they say the end is going to happen. No one walks away and goes, you know, this whole thing's a lie. No, they all cognitive dissonance, right? They try to explain with different ways. One of the things that
I was just going to say, some of the early Christian movements didn't believe in the virgin birth. So is it the Ebionites? We do have knowledge that the Christians did doubt claims that were made. So as you would expect.
Yeah. And just this whole, I think our level of required evidence should be risen. Like we should really have a higher standard. Doc Pluromana, thank you again for the super chat, my friend. How can Paul's vision of the risen Christ, who he never met, be authoritative as all things to all people for a specifically Jewish message of Jesus? Tertullian's grumblings were spot on.
Yeah. I mean, but Paul is given this elevated seat that I think is not warranted. You know, who are Paul's sources, and everyone guesses about whose sources were, and who he actually knew and who he is hanging around with. But again, we're just in the realms of sort of making inferences and trying to deduce, who his sources were or what he is trying to say. And and we were talking about this before, and I've talked about this in previous videos. Is also think about what kind of person Paul might have been. When you look at modern charismatic leaders, we understand them as people who are maybe narcissistic, maybe looking for power, maybe looking for money, or all of these things. And there are some genuine people who are evangelists who really genuinely believe that, or they have that belief distorted by these other things. What was Paul? Why would we think he must be any different to that? Was he appealing to people for money so that he could continue doing this stuff? Is it some self-perpetuating financial thing?
Yeah, this raises a lot of questions in that statement. I don't know. I can't get down to his motives. We can see that money was a concern for the poor. Maybe his motives were legit. He's trying to get money for the poor so he can keep perpetrating this movement and this idea. I don't know. When I read Paul, I said this on the phone yesterday with you when we chatted for just a moment. I just did an episode that is currently being edited by with Dr. Christopher Stanley. He's a leading Pauline scholar. The guy knows the Greek. He knows the sources. He is one of the lead guys who's really dug into Paul's use of scripture. And what I mean by that is Paul quotes the scriptures, the Septuagint, often. Not too often, but when he does, he's zeroing in and comparing the original context of what's being quoted and Paul's use and how he's using it. And when I did this episode and read his book, I kind of stopped for a moment. I swear, man, like sometimes you have to use modern analogies to understand maybe how this guy was thinking. We may not be able to pin it down completely, but when I was in the charismatic movement, like people had words of faith, like Jesus spoke to them. They had to say something. They had a spiritual moment. There were weird, like they spoke in tongues. They prophesied. We would sing in tongues. We would go into these trance-like states while worshiping God, putting the music on just right or whatever, get in a meditative state, be quiet and just talk to God, things like that. This guy, when he's quoting the scripture, he literally is saying things not like, like you're supposed to not muzzle your oxen while you're threshing, 1 Corinthians 9, it is written, don't muzzle your oxen. Well, just like that, I'm working my butt off. So like God was concerned with that, he's concerned with what's going on here. No, Paul says it is written, don't muzzle your oxen while you're working it. And then he said, is God concerned with oxen? No, this scripture is speaking about me. So Paul's not saying like an analogy, like you're supposed to let your oxen be fed when it works. I'm working the gospel in you, so you're supposed to help feed me. No, he's saying that scripture is actually talking about him. It's almost like a weird prophetic, the Bible is actually prophesying me. And
so
Paul
you saying
believes
that he's this kind of narcissistic? Is that a bit?
I don't know if
bit
it's
right? Yeah.
You can
Well,
use
yeah,
them.
it's ego. Yeah, whatever.
It's ego, whatever you want to call it. It may not even be a pride thing as much as it is this weird, actual cultic type of figure who really believes that the Bible, when his Bible, the Old Testament scripture, is actually talking about him and his Christ and his movement, that he believes he's fulfilling scripture so much that even Christ's crucifixion, his death wasn't enough, that Paul was filling up the suffering that was lacking in Christ. So it's like, whoa, what is Paul doing?
What is also interesting is he doesn't quote Jesus. So, you know, the idea that he never quotes the empty tomb or talks about the empty tomb, but never really Jesus's teachings, or, you know, there's a distinct lack of Jesus content in what he says. He refers to the Old Testament a lot, the Hebrew Bible. And of course, this lends itself towards the argument this is all later embellishments, but he doesn't refer to it because that stuff didn't exist content-wise.
Right. Yeah, sorry, I just rambled there.
No, it's okay. Okay, I mean, we barely even begun, but you know, 41 minutes in. So one thing I want to say is that there's a lot of double standards that go on with Christian apologists and believers, is because they will discount ghost stories and appearance stories and miraculous stories from other cultures and other religions, and they will say this is hallucination and this is that. You know, you only have to think about Muhammad. I write a section on this to do with the Muhammad, which is like Christians will discount the Muhammadan, you know, miracle claims or appearance claims or the revelation claims, and then, he was having hallucination. Okay, if you're happy to do that there, why can we not do that to the Christian claims? Why does that not work for these claims? And so I think before we even start analyzing the appearance narratives individually, that you've got to understand that there's arguably double standards operating for most Christians.
I agree. That happened to me. You know, I mentioned this. I got an email earlier. Someone wanted me to comment about inspiring philosophy, and he like pretty much said, dude, the guy's got an answer for everything, and he isn't some willy-nilly conservative like you see with the other apologists out there. Like, I feel that he's confident, he knows what he's talking about, that this might be true. And I sent him back a 7-minute Sin Spark video, just kind of letting him know, like, bro, go check out Muslim apologists. Go listen to Hindu apologists. Tell me they're not confident. Tell me that Vishnu did not come along. You know, like they're all confident. They all believe that they're getting sophisticated in their argumentation on proving these things. Just keep an open mind and listen to the scholars and the skeptics and consider the data. Don't close off, is all I said, because he seemed like he was being convinced.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. So when you're talking about Paul making claims about who Jesus appeared to first thing to note is that that contradicts what we learn from the Gospels. So the later Gospel accounts, I mean, Paul says Cephas, or Peter, was the first person to have Jesus appear to them. Mark says it's Mary Magdalene. Matthew says it's Mary Magdalene and the other Mary. Luke says it's Simon, and John says it's Mary Magdalene. So what's going on here? And you can imagine this kind of chronology where early Christians, such as Paul, claimed that Jesus died and appeared to those among them. And then early non-Christians made counterclaims, such as a body being in a tomb, and that these appearance claims are fairly worthless or low grade, so like ghost stories or whatever. Then Christians retort that no, these were real bodily resurrections, is what I was saying earlier. And then non-Christians refute the claim with various arguments. And then Christians claim that no, there was an empty tomb to verify the bodily resurrection, and that there were witnesses to this empty tomb, and these bodies were real bodies, and you could poke them and they could eat fish and all this kind of stuff. So you've got this gradual embellishment of the stories where they become more and more concrete. But when you look back at Paul, you know, there's nothing to suggest any of that detail.
I agree. I think that's fascinating too. The names that are used, We have to make Peter Cephas, and sometimes people want to make Simon, of course, Peter. So it's Simon, Peter, and Cephas. All three have to be Peter, because if not, you have him appearing to different people. Yeah, it doesn't.
But then you've got Paul using Cephas and Peter in the same sentence, and you're like, well, what's going on there? So it's clearly not acceptable. At least it wouldn't be acceptable to me.
Let me show the audience just the page so they could take a look at it. I really, let me know if you can see that.
Yeah, that's page 235, I think. So yeah, that onwards. So yeah, onwards from there, and it's all there. So the discussion then about Cephas and the name. So that's a problem. We're talking about contradictions and whether we've got good justification to believe what Paul says. Well, if he's contradicting what the Gospels say, then there's an issue here.
And he doesn't even mention in the 1 Corinthians Creed about women at all.
Yeah.
But then the Gospels have to have them. Yeah, and we did talk about that. I just wanted to make mention.
But no. Say that. Yeah. Make that point. Sorry.
Yeah, the point is, Del C. Allison Jr., one of the best meticulous New Testament scholars, that is definitely a believer at the end of the day because he had an experience himself. He says that on air. Makes the point that, Paul doesn't mention the women at all anywhere in this 1 Corinthians Creed. Why are the women written out of it or not even mentioned? I got it, he says. They are androcentric. It's men only. They're focused on men. And then you really have to scratch your head and ask, then why does Mark, if this whole early church is androcentric and Mark would have been part of this same thing, why is he mentioning women appearing at the tomb, or at least Matthew showing up and women appearing at the tomb, and then Luke, women appearing at the tomb? Why are they having them? They're not even in Paul, but they are appearing in all this other gospel literature. Aren't they androcentric too? So it's a double standard in my opinion to keep this story somewhat true. He's just far more sophisticated in explaining it and doesn't have as much apologetic baggage, in my opinion.
Yeah, agreed. And what we've also got to remember, as these stories went on, fish always get bigger, don't they, in the retelling of the stories? So there's always going to get more and more and more. So there's always going to be sort of embellishments. But again, to go back to Pete, you've got Paul claiming that Peter was arguably a false prophet. You've got issues going on with the reliability of the claims are being made, and I just, it's just a lack of detail. So we talk about an argument from silence, but I talk about this a lot in the book, which is a valid argument from silence. Which is when you would expect evidence for something. So talk about the appearance of the 500. When you would expect those 500 people to evidence that, someone to mention somewhere else, or the Gospels even to mention somewhere else that Jesus appeared to 500 people all at one time, you would expect there to be evidence to support that from somewhere else, but there is none. So that supports the claim that it didn't happen. It's disconfirming evidence. So the fact that Paul says it there, and that's the only place we see the appearance of the 500, the fact that there is no other evidence is disconfirming that claim.
Agreed. No, I agree. That's why, think about it. I want to put this in real clear terms. Paul says 500 witnessed him, right? Saw him, he appeared to the 500. And it says it at once. So it's very specific. He appeared to 500 at once, as if this is some group thing. And of course, the position you take is this Pentecost one. And notice in the Pentecost story, they are in a group setting. It seems to fit this. It's a mess up in the Greek. Maybe you'll go into that. But just to point out one fact, if this was in Paul for real, and it was understood that Jesus appeared to 500 people, why didn't Mark, Matthew, Luke, John, why didn't any of the gospel authors mention, oh, by the way, after he died and rose, he appeared to 500? That would have been a great point to press so that your people who are reading this are even more convinced. They didn't hear this argument before. That's what Robert Price would point out and say, look, this creed obviously wasn't known as a 500 appearance. Right. Nobody knew that. If they did, Mark, Matthew, Luke, these people would have already said, oh, by the way, he appeared to 500. But Mark has him not even appeared to anybody.
Yeah.
What
So
the heck's going on?
well, let's talk about that as we're talking about 500. Let's talk about the 500 then. So again, it doesn't appear anywhere else, so that's a real problem. And you would absolutely expect this. Like if this was, I mean, why wouldn't the gospel authors include this, especially John that much later? Why would you not include Jesus appearing to 500 people? That would be the most obvious thing to include in your post-resurrection narrative. Now, Mark finishes at 16:9, so there are no post-resurrection narratives. An empty tomb sort of narrative, end of the empty tomb narrative. So my argument would be all of this is quite obviously legendary embellishment. All of these sort of come out of different communities, and they have their different sort of stories, and then they get written into their sort of guidebooks on faith. And but it's not there in Mark. But you do have some of these claims in Paul. Now, the 500 one, as we say, it should have appeared in them all, but doesn't. Why doesn't it? Because actually, I would argue, as Richard Carrier, based on Richard Carrier's work, that this is a copyist error, and actually it should be Pentecost rather than appearing to the 500. And
So
once you
Pentecost,
so once you understand it as that, you're like, yeah, that makes loads of sense. That's why it doesn't appear everywhere else, because it does appear, because it appears in Acts. And so we do have that, and actually it makes a lot more sense, especially when you understand a couple of things. First of all, 1 Corinthians 9, where Paul talks a lot about speaking in tongues, and there's a you could talk to a little bit about this to do with your experience with. But Paul is openly advocating this kind of behavior, and this and
he speaks in tongues more than all of them. And I used to try and compete. I used to tell myself when I was a fundamentalist Christian, I'm going to try and end up speaking in more tongues than Paul. Like, I used to sit there and speak in gibberish. And of course, this is where that issue comes up. What is meant by that? Most of the academics I know that I talk to say, no, there was a real glossolalia type thing. Look at the Greek. There is definitely a common trope of this in the ancient world, and their neighbors were practicing these exact type of things in the mystery cults, etc. There was a lot of this stuff that was going on. It wasn't like, in some cases, they're trying to interpret other languages. And this is the language of angels. This would have been most likely what we consider gibberish.
Yeah.
In Paul's letters, Acts has a fictional painting, I think, is trying to retell the Tower of Babel narrative. It's trying to say, hey, don't worry, you're now understanding the languages. You're no longer confused, you see, as what was taking place earlier in Genesis. That's my personal take on that. So,
yeah. And so I think I think that Paul is definitely referring to the Pentecost instead of appearing to the 500. Richard Carrier has written a whole essay on this. I'll just quote the beginning bit, because there's a couple of little bits here. So short, and this is in one of my appendices. Shortly after listing the appearance sequence, Paul writes, Christ has indeed been raised from the dead, the first fruits of those who have fallen asleep, 1 Corinthians 15:20. The first fruits is a reference to the Pentecost ritual of offering the first fruits of the harvest to God, per Exodus, Numbers, and Deuteronomy. It seems a remarkable coincidence that Paul said the risen Jesus was akin to the Pentecost offering in the same place he mentions an appearance to over 500 all at once, and Acts narrates 100 all at once, and Acts narrates an appearance to over 100 on Pentecost when they were all together in one place, Acts 2:1. So this is interesting language similarities there. Might Paul's letter have originally read Epi Pentecostes Adelphois rather than Epano Pentecosiois Adelphois? I'm butchering the Greek, obviously.
right.
That would have meant Paul said Jesus appeared during the Pentecost to the brethren. In other words, he didn't say how many brethren there were, only that the brethren all experienced a vision at the Pentecost. This would explain where the author of Acts 2 got the idea for a mass vision of the brethren on Pentecost. And later on, he goes on to say the copying error. He talks about copyist errors and how prone they were to making errors in those days. So this is really the sort of thing that you would expect, or it's not unusual. And that indeed it just makes much more sense, and it's really easy to make that mistake linguistically.
I think it's interesting. I never really thought about that way till I read this chapter, and there may be a kernel of reality that there was some type of group setting experience that we call Pentecost early on, and Acts is fictionalizing the narrative, of course, that comes later, which would make sense on our early church origins, trying to understand how this was a Jewish only movement and how taboo it was to include Gentiles, especially non-converted proselytes, people who weren't actually proselytes, because Acts chapter 2 has proselytes along with Jews that are getting the Holy Spirit. And the Holy Spirit, man, that weird stuff happens when the Holy Spirit falls upon you in these books. So,
well, the point I make in the book is that, and all your listeners or watchers out there, all the people in the live chat now and watching later, like, what do you think when you hear about an evangelical Pentecostal church on a Sunday having all of those phenomena? Now, what do we all think? We all disbelieve it straight away. As skeptics, we disbelieve it. And in fact, the large majority of Christians would probably also disbelieve it, who are of different denominations, and think, "Oh, that's a load of rubbish." You know, Catholics aren't going to be looking at that, because otherwise they'll be doing that, or thinking, "Why can't I do that?" So they'll be thinking, "Okay, that's not true. They're lying, or they're misinterpreting, or that's not happening. Those aren't veridical experiences." Well, do you know what? Just take that a few steps further and include the original Pentecost.
right.
There you go. It's not that difficult. It's not that difficult to go, we all disbelieve that, some kind of weird hallucinatory phenomenon, you know, hysterical phenomenon. Yeah, we think it's happening there. Oh, and also in Paul's time.
There's a lot of issue even within Christendom right now, like on how when I went from the fundamentalist charismatic movement, moving over to more of like a Calvary Chapel-ish Baptist-y type of, then became a Calvinist, a Presbyterian, where they say, well, in the first century, gifts and all of that stuff was going on, and that which is perfect was the whole word of God, like the completion of the text. They have like different interpretations of this to try and explain what's going on here, but they try to get around why these gifts aren't still happening today. And like there's a lot of cognitive dissonance that's set in to try and explain the data, is all I'm saying. Real quick, Doc Pluralmanat, another super chat. Mark's rapture tradition looks a lot like the conclusion the husband, is it Charias, has when he finds his wife's tomb open and empty in Charias and Calero by Cheriton. Seems to echo Mark 2:20. I need to read this. I think that this is probably other literature that shows empty tomb narratives and things like that. But yeah, have you read this?
Yeah, no, I'm not aware of this, but Doc, I'm sure he'll be upset that he super chatted out and we've gone.
No, I got to give him a pat, praise him on the show. I mean, I got to read this myself. Thank you, Doc.
Yeah, I mean, there's certainly a lot. You know, we'll come on to talk very soon about the road to Emmaus and how that's hearkening back to Old Testament Hebrew Bible scriptures, and so there's a lot of drawing. Intertextuality from within the Bible, from within different books in the Bible. Yeah. So my conclusion there would be the appearance of the 500 definitely didn't happen. If you're thinking this can only be understood as appearing to 500 people at once, it definitely didn't happen, because that claim is not, the evidence is not commensurate with the claim. Okay, which is to say it's an out of the ordinary claim. To be justified in believing that, we would need evidence that's out of the ordinary. 2 sentences in Paul that's unverifiable is not good enough for that. So I don't believe it. But I actually think it's far more plausible that it's copyist error and it just means Pentecost, in which case, and I think that just makes much more sense anyway. Like if I was a Christian, I would think that made more sense.
Yeah, because this shows that Acts Pentecost has some historical validity in Paul. I mean, why wouldn't you want to take that position?
Yeah, exactly. So I would say, and then it just comes to whether, you know, what's the evidence for believing that event or exactly that event. And again, if Paul's the first one and that's all the evidence he's got for that, that's still not good enough for that. Do you know what I mean? So I would dismiss the 500. You could, if you want, talk about sort of mass hallucination events. Melbourne, 300 people experiencing UFOs back in the 60s, I think it was. And then you've got the Fatima sun miracles in Portugal, of people having sort of hallucinations, mass hallucinations of visual phenomena. And you can explain them in naturalistic ways. You can talk about Sabbatai Sevi is a really interesting figure with loads of parallels to Jesus. So Sabbatai Sevi was this Jewish apostate to Islam eventually, but he was thought to be Messiah. So he had a big old following where they thought he was a Messiah. I think this is back in the 1600s. And in the end, he became an apostate to Islam, and loads of his followers went through cognitive dissonance. So it's really fascinating look into how people react to data that doesn't agree with their what they think about stuff with their beliefs. But what you also had is Nathan, one of his sort of friends, who was writing letters and saying that there were at the time of his messianic activities, there was supposedly the prophets being seen in the streets of Smyrna, and all these miracle accounts. He's writing letters. Actually, those are better attested to than Paul's letters. As in, this is his contemporary writing to other followers contemporaneously, and my argument would be, and I make this argument in the book, that if you're willing to believe Paul and the claims about Jesus, then you should be even more willing to believe the claims of Sabbatai Sevi. But you don't, so therefore double standards.
Dr. Price told me that I have not read a lot of the stuff that he always mentions. At some point, hopefully I will get to cover this myself. But he said that when this guy went and thought he was going to convert some Muslim leader at the sword, the guy's like, nah, actually, you came here and you're the one who's converting, buddy. And he does for the sake of his life. His followers literally start to say, how did Bob put it? He said, this is part of the plan. The Messiah had, either you had to be completely good and observe everything according to Torah for the end and the Messiah to come, or you had to do complete opposite and corrupt everything for the Messiah to come to save everybody. And they were like, no, he is the Messiah, and he's trying to tell us we all need to convert to cause God to interact into history for the Messiah to come. Like, it's cognitive dissonance works.
They ended up having some weird sort of hybrid belief with Kabbalistic sort of beliefs. So it's a really interesting look at cognitive dissonance. I mean, that would be fascinating to be able to access those people and that movement now. But it tells us an awful lot about the Jesus movement as well. It really does. He's a really fascinating figure. And my argument would be that, look, if you disbelieve all the claims about him, then it's really odd that you believe all the claims about Jesus, because arguably the claims about him are better attested to in many ways.
Scott Daniel said cessationism is itself an admission that these miracles and gifts were never legitimate. Thank you, Scott. I appreciate that. Yeah, why aren't they running around and everybody's performing these actions? It's like only within this text that you really find this stuff happening. Then once in a while, a cracker turns into the face of Jesus, but
it's the whole now we've got video attestation. It seems that miracles don't happen so much. It's kind of weird. This idea that it's so arbitrary, and this is what happens when you have to square the data with your core belief. This is cognitive dissonance, which is like, I've got these core beliefs. This kind of stuff isn't happening anymore. How do I square that? And you're like, I've got to keep my core belief. So then I invent something like cessationism, or then whatever it is. It's just, it seems like the whole history of Christianity is just cognitive dissonance in different contexts.
Right.
Which is, yeah. But to talk, so that's the 500. I think that pretty much puts the 500 to bed. With a big bed. So the thing to talk about as well is the 11 or 12. So Paul talks about 12. Jesus appears to the 12, which is interesting because, you've got Judas not being a disciple. So what's going on there? And in fact, this has caused quite a lot of arguments within theological circles, to the point where later translators, the Vulgate Bible, the Latin Bible, they changed, interpolated the 12 and changed it to 11. So they obviously thought it was such a problem that Paul used 12 and not 11, that they change it. So it's just an interesting little area of debate. Where do we have 11? Do we have 12? Did he appear in Jerusalem or Galilee? You've just got different contradictory claims that maybe aren't the end of the world, but if you are some kind of hyper literalist, you can't be, because you've got problems.
I could see someone easily go, no, they replaced Judas with another one and counted him as the 12, or some simple explanation that could easily, in my opinion. But it is a red flag. Why would the church see this as a problem? You know,
that's the thing.
How were they thinking about this?
That was my point. So the point I say in the book is there are many attempted Christian rationalizations to this for the Christian apparent contradiction, ranging from the 12 being a colloquialism to designate the apostles, to being a rough rounding, and all such similar reasoning. Of course, since the church itself deemed it important enough to change the wording, it seems that these weren't decent enough reasons for those actually changing the wording. Mm-hmm. So I think the fact that they did do this interpolation means that there is a bit of a problem. And you know, we've got issues with Jerusalem and Galilee, and you know, where did the appearances take place, and you know, just more reason to disbelieve. What does this better support the thesis that of atheism or Christianity? And when you've got these differing gospel accounts, you know, you have to jump through hoops to harmonize them. And every time you jump through hoop, you're just making the probability lower and lower that this is all true.
Yeah, I'm with you on that. I think it is kind of interesting how the modern apologist will ignore these problems the early church rose about this, because they found a way to roll over it with another explanation. They just don't see it. And I think it's really interesting that you're paying attention to that detail. Historically, for us who are looking back, why did the church see that as a problem? I'm curious to know, because they must have not been able to reconcile this. They had to change a number, it seems, rather than reconciling it.
Yeah. So, and another little thing, and we talked about this a little bit before, you and I. Paul says, he says, after that, he appeared to more than 500 brothers and sisters at one time. He very clearly says at one time, which means that for this particular appearance, it happened all at once. Well, actually, I would say that's Pentecost that happened at once. Yeah. But anyway, it's the use of at one time is really important, because then he goes on to say, and then he appeared to James and then to the apostles. Now, modern Christians often see that Jesus appearing to the apostles was appearing to them all at once. But actually, from the language used there, we should be inferring that he didn't appear to them all at one time, that those were separate appearances. And in fact, you know, if it had been all at one time, Paul would have said all at one time, like he did with the 500. It's a minor point.
I don't know if that's a minor point though, bro. That's a good point, because I hear this from Mike Licona. I hear this from Christian apologists. Every time I turn around, their argument is you can't have group hallucinations, right? Which that even alone is disputed in showing, yes, you can. But in this case, they always want to talk about he appeared to this group of people, where Apologia comes on and wants to say it started with probably a single individual or only one or two people who said they saw it, and then they shared this experience with other people, and then it turned into something much more than what it was. But if we grant that these people experienced it, there's no reason to think there's a group experience of when he says he appeared to the 12. Oh, that's the 12, like the whole group at once. Like you said, he appeared to the 500 at once. If you take this to be 500 or at Pentecost, whatever, it says it once. It doesn't say that for the 12. It doesn't say that for the apostles. So these could have been individual little, well, I felt a warm and fuzzy inside of me, and I had my eyes closed, and I saw in my head what I thought was Jesus. Boom, he appeared to me. You know, who knows?
Which is, but you know, when he's saying, and I was the last one he appeared to, which was a visionary experience, you know, light and all sorts of stuff that clearly not a bodily appearance of Jesus, then all of those other appearances that he's not detailing, they're merely listing, right, could be similar visionary experiences, like you say, just some kind of attribution to Jesus, but not a veridical kind of objective out of mind experience.
Right. I agree.
So then it comes on to the road to Emmaus. So the road to Emmaus is fascinating because it is unbelievably obvious to me that this is theology, not history. And this is the thing I say throughout the book, which is theology, not history, theology, not history. You can explain this part of the resurrection or the execution or this or that. It's theology, not history. Jesus is the Yom Kippur goat. You know, Jesus is the Passover lamb. Jesus is this is the gospel writers including this because this is theological. Right, but it didn't happen, like obviously because it's really bizarre or it's contradictory or whatever. So the road to Emmaus as an actual story, so if you read that story, it's nuts, right? You've got two people walking with Jesus who supposedly know him post-resurrection. They don't recognize him. They walk for ages swapping stories, then go into a house, and then they break bread with him, and then they suddenly recognize him and he disappears for what, you know. It's just that's nuts. That doesn't make any sense, but it does if you understand literary motifs that were really common at the time, that we see in the Bible, but we also see in Greek literature. When we look at Homer's Odyssey, then there's a really interesting parallel there. And when we understand that this is theology, so what's this story telling you? So if I say to you, what do you think this story is trying to communicate?
What I think, that's changed over the my time of studying this. But at the end of the day, I would think it's trying to convey this message of him always being with you. This is the reason why is I think that the breaking of the bread, which reveals him, is, as Dr. Price has said, and I used to think this was crazy till I actually studied more and realized, well, hold on, there's something to this. The breaking of the bread that Jesus performs in that house then disappears is the Eucharist. It is the eating of the flesh and drinking of the blood of Jesus. And that even though I'm not with you physically, literally not there with you, I'm always with you. It's this motif that I'm actually there with you. So it's almost like a story, a fictional story of trying to tell you, hey, I'm really here with you. But people may have taken it literally. I don't know. It just seems like that's
I'd say it's recognizing that Jesus is in the breaking of the bread.
Right.
You know, that you know, I understand that Jesus is here now with us as I break the bread. You know, it's that symbolism of the Eucharist where Jesus is now with us. You know, so that it's not three blokes walking down the road, two of them not noticing this guy. And then it's also weird because Jesus has just been killed, right? He's been scourged, beaten, in his bloody clothes or whatever. He's got loads of wounds, resurrects, and they don't recognize him, right? So it's like, okay, that's weird. So all of his wounds have now healed, and he's materialized some amazing clothes or normal clothes where they don't recognize him. But then later he's like, oh, check my wounds out. So he's got some wounds
in this. So just so our audience, I want our audience to catch what you're saying here. This was great in your book. I never thought about this. You think in ways I've never thought about. That's what I love about your books. Gotta get the book. I'm serious. It's that good. What you did is you said in Luke, because this Emmaus story happens in Luke. You have him walk in. They can't recognize him. They don't know it's him. He breaks the bread. Some people act like they may have saw his hands when he broke the bread and therefore saw the marks. There's people who go above and beyond to try and do that. But what's interesting is they don't recognize this dude who just got completely slaughtered. Okay. And he's walking on his feet, you know, no sore, you know, he's walking like a normal individual for miles, by the way, miles, the whole day. I mean, this guy just had his feet nailed. Okay. And here he is walking on them. But anyway, later in this same book, here he is just to try and convince people. He's showing his wounds and such. It's so weird to take the Emmaus story.
You haven't got the scratches around your head from the crown of thorns. You haven't got like welts all over you. You haven't got like bruises. You haven't got like broken bones. You haven't got a pierced side. Oh, you just got a couple of little holes in your hand. That's fine. Okay.
Yeah, like were they wearing face masks too? So you didn't even know it was him? I mean, like, so if you take this literal, we have problems.
Yeah.
Period.
Yeah. Period. So then you have to then start saying, well, okay, well, God is magic, right? He can do anything. But it's just weird that he's like, I'm going to heal myself completely, but I think I'll just keep these little holes here just for a little party trick or something. And you're like, well, this is so obviously not true. But then when you start looking at other things like, well, what does Emmaus mean? Where's Emmaus? Well, we don't really know where it is on a map. Some people think it's here, some people there. But if it is there, this particular place that they talk about, well, actually that's too far given the distance that's used in Luke, and it doesn't quite work. So there's loads of problems with what it means until you realize, well, in my opinion, that you start looking at Homer's Odyssey, and understanding that Luke, in learning Greek, would have learned through Homer's work, right? And this is just absolutely normal. And in fact, you've spoken enough with Dennis MacDonald to say that, you know, it's all over the shop. There is, you know, Mark, Luke, lots of intertextuality going on with the Greek classics. And you would absolutely expect that, because this is how they're learning Greek. They don't wake up in the morning going, oh, gee, I suddenly know how to write Greek. You know, you have to spend decades learning the Greek classics in order to learn how to write Greek and learn how to use the language as well as they do. So in doing that, you have at the forefront of your psyche things like Homer. Homer's Odyssey is like up there. So then,
do you want me to read? Can I read what you quote this, just so people know what Robert Price says here? And you say, there is still much debate as to where Emmaus is located, the famous Lucan destination of the two travelers to whom Jesus appears. Robert Price offers up an interesting theory on why Luke, proficient with Greek and Greek text, might have chosen the name Emmaus. My guess, this is Dr. Bob speaking, Dr. Price. My guess is that Luke intends a punning reference to the name from the Odyssey, that of Emmaus, the faithful servant to whom Telemachus and Odysseus reveal their secret identities, as Jesus does to the Emmaus disciples, reveals his secret identity to them.
So what you've got in the Odyssey is that Odysseus returns back to wherever he goes to, and he's in disguise, and Emmaus doesn't recognize who he is until much later. And you know, it's like, is a really obvious parallel, and the name is like one letter difference or whatever. It's just like it seems overtly you know, like it is an intertextual reference and an homage to Homer, and the motif where you have characters not recognizing other people is super common in ancient literature, and in fact common within the Bible itself. So there's a really good article by Neil Godfrey Vredar on the origin and meaning of the Emmaus story, which I would advise everyone to look at that piece. It really
I'll
is
post
very
it
good.
right now. Here it is, just so everybody could see it.
There is so much in there that I wouldn't even. I mean, I give it a little hint in my book, but there's just absolutely chock full with loads of stuff. For example, he talks about how it's really similar to stories in Genesis and stories in Judges as well. So the story, he says, the story in Judge contains many of the motifs used in Luke 24. A, two people receive a visit from a supernatural being. B, only one of the two persons is named. How readers would love to know the name of both in both stories. The authors are both in some way playing with their readers' curiosity. Readers are told the names of both parties in all other stories where an angel comes to announce a special birth. C, the supernatural being speaks of divine plans and knowledge. D, the couple invite this stranger to stay with them and eat. E, a meal or sacrifice is begun. F, before the stranger eats, he miraculously vanishes before the couple's eyes. G, by witnessing the disappearing trick, the couple are made aware of the identity of their guest. And H, the couple speak to each other about their experience and what they have just seen and express their emotional responses. You know, and so on and so forth. And there's so many more references. It's just like, yeah, I see what's going on here. This is a really common motif. This is theology, not history.
Yeah, totally. I mean, I really enjoyed that part too, where Genesis gets brought up with Jacob.
Yeah.
And it's like being revealed to him at this moment that this is the place that God, you know, would obviously want him to set up Bethel, I think it is. And so there's some type of parallel there potentially with the Hebrew Bible. Chris, thank you for the super chat. Resurrection, Nativity are must reads. I am too dumb for Why I'm an Atheist, though. I love you.
Oh, that's brilliant. I wonder if he's the guy that put a review on, for a 4-star review for Why I'm Atheist. He said it's entitled Deep. He's like, I think this is a really good book. I didn't quite get it as much as I should have done, but thank you. Thank you so much.
Chris, thank you for that, man. It makes me feel really good to see people are engaging with my guests that I have on and just learning this stuff together. like creates a bond among us in the chat to like really probe into this stuff. There's so much to do. It's fun. It's fun being a detective and looking at this stuff and finding out. And then Doc Pleuromonaut, thank you again, my friend. Emmaus is Greek.
Indefatigable, that man.
Huh?
He's indefatigable, Doc. He's untiring. He's amazing.
I'm not kidding. Like some of the questions, he might as well be on the show with us. Seriously. Emmaus is Greek for stay in Jerusalem, but the disciples only spoke Aramaic.
I don't know. I'd have to look into that. There are some interesting ideas. So I think I talked about this with you before. I don't know, but there is some examples in the Gospels where there is a pun. I think Jesus uses a particular pun that only works in Greek, and it doesn't work in Aramaic and it doesn't work in English, and therefore you can rest assured that Jesus never said that, because he would have spoken in Aramaic, and that would only make sense being said and spoken in Greek. That, you know, the whole thing is Bart Ehrman talks a little bit about that.
Wow.
But yeah. So yeah.
Thank you so much, Doc. Appreciate it. He said,
"If I were,
they were told to stay in Jerusalem." Joke. They were told to stay in Jerusalem. Thank you so much.
So that bit that you were talking about with regard to Jacob, this is what Neil Godfrey says. When Jacob was traveling, the sun set. Early Jewish legends explain the point of reference in Genesis 28:11 by saying God had caused it to set prematurely to force Jacob to stop there. And he had a dream that he was in the presence of God. God spoke to him there. And the name of the place was originally known as Luz. In the Septuagint, it is Lammaeus, which is obviously very similar to Emmaus. In the Codex Bezae, this is the name used for Emmaus in Luke 24. In an early reading of Luke, perhaps the earliest, the Emmaus Road revelation happened at the same place that Jacob dreamed he was visited by God. So again, is this theology, not history? You know, the idea that this is being contrived to have even more meaning.
Yeah, and if it is both, and it's eclectic, like Dennis MacDonald believes it's both the Bible, their scripture, and the Greek literature, it just tells you how ingenious these authors really were in creating literature.
And this motif, the most common motif, was a resolution in a narrative through a gradual series of recognition scenes at the end. Throughout so many plots of novels, characters' identities have become confused, changed, or lost. And this is, you know, really in ancient literature, this is really common motif. So my opinion on that whole story, and you know, you could spend ages on that alone. I mean, there's so much intertextual reference, but again, it's theology. It's not history. Absolutely, 100%.
I'm with you. I think that I just don't see any way to reconcile that. When I had Mike Licona admit that what we call zombie apocalypse, you know, on record, he's like, yeah, I just didn't see it as historically reliable. And when I teased out this debate recently where Bart Ehrman's going to be debating him on April the 9th, I said, Bart, what are you going to do? What do you think is going to happen? He goes, well, I think he's going to try and dodge a lot of what I say. But he says, I'm going to try and pin him down because he himself believes there's legendary material in the Gospels, which this whole thing is.
It's you then start, that's your chink in the armor. And then it's like, well, okay, if you agree that bit is, how can you say this bit isn't?
Right.
And so this is why he would dodge. He would want to dodge because he has to then admit that, okay, if I'm saying this bit's legend and everything else isn't, there are either double standards here or there's some kind of special pleading for this bit being legend, but not the rest of it. And that's really problematic. So I understand why Christians won't deal with these things or shy away from dealing with openly, because it opens a can of worms. I get that, but you are just not justified in your beliefs then, and you're not fronting up to dealing with the data.
Well put. I don't want to mispronounce. Is that Leah or Lee? Lee. Okay. Thank you so much for the super chat. Read your book twice. Most likely will hit 4 to 5 times by the end of 2022. Very highly recommend. Great thought approach. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Lee. Wow, that's amazing. Really, thank you. That's humbling. Yeah. So, what a legend. Or is he? Or is he real? I don't know.
I've seen Lee with my own eyes. I trust me. It's like,
but then that's just an assertion.
Yeah, but you have to believe it because it's coming from me. You know what I mean? Okay. Like, I can't make up stuff.
All right, Paul. So this leads us on to visions themselves, right? So this is the second part of this big chapter. The first one was talking about the appearances. Don't really believe them. Really problematic. But what could explain the data if you think something was going on?
Mm-hmm.
Now, I called this chapter something like Elvis is in town or something.
Yeah, I love that title.
But I really wasn't sure about that because I thought it was devaluing the claim. Post-resurrection appearances, Elvis is in town. Because I thought, the idea of comparing the Jesus resurrection appearances to like seeing Elvis. But I thought, do you know what? No, because actually, those are people having hallucinations that many of them genuinely believe were true. There is a real parallel here. And so I used to think that visions and hallucinations was a bit of a cop-out here for explaining away the appearance accounts. But the more I researched hallucinations and the science behind them, the more prevalent I realized they were, the more probable this account is by orders of magnitude. And so therefore, this does a much better job of explaining the data than the Christian thesis. So I have no problem now with saying that. It's not to say all of the appearance accounts can be explained by hallucinations. But it's to say that they probably got a couple of hallucinations going on. And then with a lot of political machination of the early church and authority being given to people who said that they had appearances, you're going to have a lot more of these popping up. So there you go.
So I must admit, like, I think everybody who watches my channel, who's subscribed to me for a while, knows that I'm a recovering drug addict, over 7 years almost. And, I was really bad off. But when I was younger, I experimented with other drugs. And I tried a drug one time that had me literally see things and experience things that I believed were real. They had such an impact. I spent the next week at my high school going around practically. I was like this Christian who struggled and wanted to kind of like be cool with the rest of the crowds out there. At the same time, I'd try to be right with God. And I went out there like preaching in the high school, like, do not take these drugs that are out there right now. They're demonic. I saw this and I saw that. And I had all this experience that I was telling people. And after I realized, like, dude, chemically induced, I went into a hallucinative state. Like I really experienced something that was all induced by chemicals. And the brain already has a lot of those things naturally. I'm just saying that I know I believed what I experienced was true. Doesn't mean it was, but I believe it was true.
There's a couple of really important points to make there. So most people have hallucinations, or pretty much all people have hallucinations generally, or most, believe that they are true.
Mm-hmm.
So that is a really common element to hallucinations. There are lots of different types of hallucinations you can have. Olfactory, you can have touch, smell, taste, auditory, and visual hallucinations. What people look at is something called source monitoring. So source monitoring is where what we do to is monitoring the source of our experiences, right? So do we think that is coming from outside our head, or do we understand this to be a hallucination that we're having and it's in our head? And what happens is that source monitoring can be really deeply affected by our cultural environment. So that if you are in a really superstitious culture who happen to believe a lot more in ghosts and stuff and spirits, then you're more likely to see these things as coming from outside your head. If you live in a modern skeptical culture, then you'll say, okay, I'm having an experience and it might be explained by brain states or whatever. An example of this. So when I started writing this chapter, I thought I've never experienced visions. And I thought about things. And I thought, actually, yes, I have. Two particularly interesting experiences. One was when I was walking up. My mate's got a backpackers in the mountains of Slovakia, and we were walking up a mountain just opposite that, the Tatras Mountains in Slovakia, and we were walking up basically into the clouds, really low-hanging clouds, but the sun above, and this incredible light atmosphere that I can't do justice with words, but it was ethereal. It was absolutely amazing, just within a cloud that also seemed to have beaming light. And we were like, this is absolutely bonkers. This is incredible. Now, I'm a skeptic. I was like, this is incredible light distortion and stuff going on. But I felt like I was in some kind of heavenly cloud. I felt some kind of religious experience. Now, had I been religious, I would have interpreted it that way.
Mhm.
In other words, this is kind of talking about that source monitoring, that if I was myself bringing that baggage to this experience, then I would have interpreted it completely differently. And we all came away, and then we walked kind of above the cloud sort of thing, or it dissipated, and then we're like, oh, we're back to normal. That's the end of that. But it was absolutely incredible. Now, that wasn't a vision, but I was getting loads of experiences that in another life I would have interpreted as religious experience. But even more sort of hallucinatory, I've had a couple of experiences of sleep paralysis. I don't even know what sleep paralysis is. So it's where you are sort of asleep, but not. But your eyes are open, but you can't move. So you are paralyzed, but you have kind of hallucinations. And I was in the backpackers in New Zealand, and I had this, a horde of demons that came through the room and then right next to me and out the window. It was absolutely petrifying, and I couldn't move. Just couldn't move. But I had that full-on hallucination and experience, and where I'd seen demons, but I knew what sleep paralysis was because I'd experienced it a couple of times before. My sister used to get it as well, and it's really scary. But in fact, it's been incorporated into kind of cultures like Africa. Certain cultures in Africa, it's interpreted. People experience like an old hag sitting on their legs or at the end of their bed, and it's actually been incorporated into their
mythology and
cultural
legend.
mythology. Yeah. But so I thought, actually, this is interesting. I have had some experiences which are hallucinatory or certainly weird experiences and so, I don't know what that says particularly, but stuff happens. The brain is a crazy thing. So then when I started looking more into it, the data is pretty robust that shed loads of people have experiences. There's a little bit of data I'll read you. I mean, do you have anything to add about sort of visionary experiences?
I think, I've had plenty of experiences. I wanted to bring out the most vivid, which was when I had taken the ecstasy that had who knows what in it at the time. But there are times when I'd go to church, get into that trance-like state and worship, and have these in my mind, if you will, my mind's eye visioning in my head of this bright light, and there's Jesus on the throne, and there's illuminating light. And if you get enough into the trance, you start to believe in this, in the things that you're putting into your head that you're wanting to believe is there. Take that, I did an interview earlier with Simca, the naked archaeologist guy, and he was talking about the ossuaries. And like for this whole century, Jews were burying the dead and then putting them in bone ossuary boxes, if you will, if they had the money, of course. Like by the thousands, there was this weird, the resurrection's about to happen, just put your bones in this box, so don't worry, any moment now mindset. And if you combine that with all the primed teachings of the resurrection's about to end, the apocalypse is about to happen, etc., I imagine that they're going to be like really thinking the most superstitious you can about things. Demons are all around you. I used to think that as a Christian. I thought the end was coming soon. I had dreams, vivid dreams, that the end happened in my dream. One was with lightning bolts. I was sitting on the front porch, struck me, and I was being sucked up, and I looked around, and all these other Christians had lightning bolts attached to them. And then the other one was the whole heavens turned to fire, and fire was coming down, and I woke up crying because I thought this was the end, and this was a vision of what was really going to happen. Like, that's another example of possible visions. They didn't say, Paul doesn't say, oh, by the way, they weren't asleep when they had these visions. You have the story of the road to Damascus, but that's a whole nother. There's another problem with that, by the way. There's theology involved. And anyway.
Yeah, no, it reminds me of, I meant to read out another Celsus quote, which I think is sort of pertinent to this. So this is Celsus again. Who beheld this? A half-frantic woman, as you state, and some other one, perhaps of those who were engaged in the same system of delusion, who had either dreamed so owing to a peculiar state of mind, or under the influence of a wandering imagination, had formed to himself an appearance according to his own wishes, which has been the case with numberless individuals, or, which is most probable, one who desired to impress others with this portent, and by such a falsehood to furnish an occasion to impostors like himself. This is an amazing quote, right? This is Celsus saying, you've got two options here, right? And this is early doors. So this is a really early skeptic, like a Jewish polemicist, that's saying what I would say, which is you've got two options here. One, you've got some hallucinations of people imagining things that they want to imagine. Like they he's some great language here. So either dreamed owing to a particular state of mind or under the influence of a wandering imagination had formed to himself an appearance according to his own wishes. So that's a really, really great language. And then he says, or it's a falsehood in order to impress others. And we'll come on to this a little bit later. But there's an idea that people are having appearances because they are politically convenient for them to have these experiences so that they can.
What page is this on, by the way? Where is this quote?
257.
Okay, Oh, okay. I literally was almost at that.
Yeah, because you didn't quite get that far, but when you were reading.
Yeah, that's that's a great quote, really early on. So interesting.
Yeah. So talking about some investigations, I mean, there's so much you could say scientifically speaking, and Bart Ehrman does a good job of breaking this down, and again, how Jesus became God. Scientific investigations can be carried out with different levels of methodology over time. Looking into the phenomena of hallucinations, the most commonly cited study found that some 13.3% of people have claimed to have had at least one vivid hallucination. Moreover, 39% of college students have had said they had auditory hallucinations. In addition, around 1% of people have visual hallucinations of a dead person with whom they also have a conversation. This is 1 in 100, not only visually hallucinating, but auditorily hallucinating too, actually having conversations with a dead person. 1% of people, 1 in 100, right? So when you're talking about the early Christian followers, then statistically, you are going to be having some people having had hallucinations.
If there was even, say there was 100 people who followed him, at least one of them would have been likely to have had this. So,
but actually, it gets worse or better. So for cultures that are more superstitious, and for this we can probably count all historical cultures, those incidences are higher. In one informal study of Hawaiian natives, a not insignificant 40% of people were found to have had auditory or visual encounters with dead people. So that's not 1% of people having conversations with a dead person. That's 40% of people hallucinating dead people. And so this is about source monitoring being effective, but not just source monitoring, as in where this is coming from, but actually having these experiences. They are hugely affected. And there's a chap called Bentel who's done a lot of research into this. And he's shown that source monitoring judgments, which is it coming from inside or outside, are affected by the culture in which people grow up in. But the key point as well is that stress and emotional arousal can have serious effects on a person's source monitoring skills. Someone who is under considerable stress or experiencing deep grief, trauma, or personal anguish is more likely to experience a failure of source monitoring. And then on and on and on. And the idea is that then you talk about hallucinations and visions being influenced really strongly by emotional states and arousal. So anger, guilt, sadness, all these sort of different bereavement sort of scenarios. And you think, well, what were the Jesus's followers going through? Well, they're going through guilt. You know, they ran away, they abandoned Jesus. Guilt, anger, Jesus being executed, sadness, grief, all of these emotions that we know really strongly influence whether people have hallucinations or not. Jesus's followers would be having them all. And you're like, okay, so now we're talking like 40% maybe of people have them in these cultures, but then if these particular people are showing really strong emotions that are predisposing to having these experiences, then it's almost a dead cert. Well, it's probable.
So there's even let me add a caveat to this, because I think there's something that I don't know if this is probably written somewhere. It's hard to come up with something that no one else has thought of. But when I was reading this book by Cattell Berthelot here on the shelf, Jews and the Roman Rivals, trying to understand how, pagans and Jews and how the ideas of pagan Rome impacted Jews, etc. There was this idea that when a non-Jew would convert, that they couldn't say, according to certain rabbis, they couldn't say that they are the children of Abraham. Okay, so they can't say a certain prayer because they're not really Abraham's children. But then another rabbi comes on and says, no, have you not read the scripture? His name was changed to Abraham, for he would be the father of many goyim. And the word goyim would mean nations, non-Israelites. So yeah, they are children of Abraham. they talk as though Abraham is still alive. This is what's really weird about the Jewish cultural background. Let's say the Hawaiian background you're talking about, this cultural background that has like 40% of people think that they're talking to them, experiencing this. Assume that they believe their patriarchs are somehow alive in another realm or something like that. If that is something that is frequent, like even though they died, they're still alive. Abraham is still adopting children, or he's some figure, Abraham's bosom, right? They're in Abraham's bosom. Abraham's still alive. What if Jesus, in a sense, is in that effect, how Jews are seeing their patriarchs as still living figures? Their God is a living God, right? I wonder if that plays a role into not being able to see the end to Jesus. You see what I'm trying to get at? They're already primed to believe in figures that have died are still alive in some sense. So here, Jesus is just a step away from that. And along with the resurrection, along with all of this going on, it's just an easy step to see Jesus as still alive. I don't know. I mean, it's something to consider that.
They would be primed, as you're saying, to be susceptible to such beliefs and such experiences.
100%.
Want to get this? Yeah, go for that.
Scott Daniel, thank you, my friend. At my grandmother's 80th birthday, my aunt tried to show me in an iPhone video of orbs of light circling grandma as she opened gifts. It was Lent.
So, but what's wonderful, that's a really nice example, an inoffensive example of how people believe what they want to believe and will interpret things in the way that they want to interpret them. And you see certain visual phenomena and you're like, that's this, brilliant. And then look, that's this, and it's in your mind, and now you believe it. And you know, there you go. And if no one's there to say, actually, I can see that, and no, it's not that, then once that time period has been gone, like, so if Scott hadn't been able to point out that wasn't the case, right, then she would have said that later, like that time had passed and they were orbs of light, and that would be a family story. I remember when I saw your grandma opening her birthday presents with orbs of light around her, not dust motes or whatever, you know. So it's just that sort of stuff must happen really commonly.
I mean, I woke up the other night to use the restroom, and when I went to go get back into the bed, the light on my wife's side of the bed, as I'm starting to lay down, turned on. And my immediate human natural reaction was, who the hell's on that side of the bed? Like, I literally started going, who's there? And then I looked, nothing was there. And I immediately went like, you know, the natural thing as a human is to assume agency. There's something going on. And then I realized, and I really started thinking like, what the hell? You know, like, is there something trying to say something? Like, I'm not kidding. Alive. Right. You know, no, but I really like went, what the hell? And then I looked and there was a cord that is right there. And it's one of those lights that if you like,
tap it,
just touch any bit of possible vibration would cause that light to come on. And it was so sensitive that no wonder it was flickering when it first came on. I was like, okay, then it came on. I wanted to immediately go, started talking to stuff like, is something there? Like, is something, you know, like, I was, what the heck, dude? I mean, it's normal to think this. So it's easier to think someone would fall for this and think this is true than not. You know, I get it. That's why I sympathize. Thank you, Derek Cruz. Thank you so much for that super chat. Enjoy your show, my friend. Thank you.
Good stuff. I'm glad you are. So I wanted to quote from an anthropologist I quote quite a bit in a book, a guy called Herman Sidke. He wrote a book called, it's an excellent book, although it's an academically priced book, Religion, Supernaturalism, the Paranormal and Pseudoscience, an Anthropological Critique. A really great section on the resurrection and all the Jesus sort of claims within a whole larger anthropological analysis in terms of, you know, experiences and phenomena in lots of different cultures. But he talks about, so he quotes, it says, in the weeks after the crucifixion, the cultists struggled with sadness, confusion, hopelessness, doubts, self-reproachment, denial, and survivor guilt for abandoning Jesus to a lonely death at the hands of his enemies. Survivor guilt commonly occurs in circumstances that involve wars, accidents, major tragedies, and especially when a loved one dies violently, but others are spared. it is, and he references all of this. It is also very likely that the disciples felt an overwhelming need for forgiveness because of their betrayal and desertion. At this stage, two concurrent processes come into play. One, grief hallucinations. Two, the psychological process involved in coming to terms with the disconfirmation of deeply held beliefs. In other words, grief hallucinations and cognitive dissonance. And those two things together can do a lot to explain some of the birth of these early appearance sort of stories.
And you know how we talk about cognitive dissonance playing a role with scripture? He was raised according to scripture. 1 Corinthians 15 clearly says, you know, I thought these Christians are doing some weird things. They're perverting the text. Because if you listen to people like Rabbi Tovia Singer, they talk about New Testament completely perverts Christianity. They pervert the Hebrew Bible. They completely pervert it. But come to find out, the Dead Sea Scrolls sect and other Jewish communities were doing these interpretations of scripture to their own day. So that it made me realize, like, actually, they're already primed to search reality around them in the scripture. So when Paul talks about, you know, when we talked about him being narcissistic or this or that, I don't know if that's the term, because I used to think that the Bible was actually secretly encoding what's happening in my life too. So we can call that narcissism or just really superstitious thinking that this text
it's like the Nostradamus thinking, isn't it? Like I can morph this text into referring to me by
And it's not even like you're trying to morph it. It's like you believe it does. You believe it's speaking about you, especially if you think you're in the end. And Paul thought he was a prophet at the end of time. So add all of that, and when it talks about he died and resurrected according to scripture, they're already searching the scripture. So we could say cognitive dissonance set in, but they were already going to look and search the scriptures to make sense of whatever they were living in anyway, because they believed it was right. Just like a fundamentalist Christian today will look at the New Testament. Some of the more pre-mill dispensationalists who think the end, rapture, all that's going to happen, they might look at Revelation and see, helicopters when you see locusts, or they find a way to make the Bible make sense to their modern day.
Yeah. Well, another interesting phenomenon is, and as I say in the book, by convincing others of their visions, they end up convincing and confirming their own beliefs. This is why catastrophic failures of a cult leader turn into more intense belief and evangelization of their success. Believers will try harder to convince others that their excuse, their apologetic explaining away the failure into its success, is true. So several things going on there. You know, by evangelizing to everyone about these appearance stories that you might have is confirming them in yourself. You telling these stories and is consolidating your belief in these stories as well, particularly your own personal claims to appearances. But I think we need to understand that the early church here is a scenario where people are vying for authority and people are vying for power. You know, whether the Peter, James scenario and Paul, and so therefore, you know, if he's got or she's had an experience and I haven't, you know, and I want to be a person of note, then really I need to get myself an experience.
So this gets into a really complicated question that I'd like to pose, and it's not necessarily either or, but it does open up the possible answer of suggesting that these appearances potentially out the gate may be political. I mean, it may be, look, I know I am an apostle because Christ appeared to me. Not sure it answers all the data, but it's something to consider, because from what I recall, Dr. Price talked about the pseudo-Clementine. What is it? The pseudo-Clementine authors. There's this dispute between Peter and Paul about this appearance. And he's like, a vision, we were learning, Peter says, according to this literature, we learned from Christ himself. Like, we learned from Jesus on earth. Like, how do you know that was Jesus and not an angel of light, a demon, or, like, he's disputing with Paul over this whole visionary supposed experience that he has and it claimed to authority. So maybe like you're talking about, political authoritarian type of mindset is involved in this whole visionary experience. And everyone who was an authority was saying, oh yeah, he appeared to me too.
Yeah. And so do I go into this now or just before I'll come back to political authority.
Feel
Because
free
I
to
think
do,
that's
you brought me there. That's your
yeah,
fault.
I know. No, it's my fault completely. But actually, I want to talk more about actual hallucinations before kind of finishing on that point. So we have quite a lot of interesting examples of actual hallucinations taking place at times of real emotional hardship. And one such one was in after this 2004 tsunami in Thailand, around Thailand. So Thailand, in certain communities, or actually pretty much broadly, is very much more of a spiritual. People are very much more spiritual and believe in spirits existing in trees and stuff like that. So what I'm trying to say is the earlier claim that if you live in a culture where this is more the norm, then you're more likely to have these kind of experiences.
Bingo.
Kind of pretty obvious. But after the tsunami, there were loads of proper news media accounts that actually this genuinely happened, which is loads of people are afraid to go down the beaches because they were seeing so many different phenomena, so many they're hallucinating sort of ghosts and stuff of all these sort of dead people. I could quote you huge amounts of stuff, but I won't. But they were kind of mass hallucinations, so I will quote you a little bit. Majority of Thais are deeply superstitious. This is from a newspaper article. Believing ghosts reside in most large trees and keeping a spirit house in every home, where daily offerings of food and drink are given to calm nearby paranormal entities. Mental health experts warn tsunami survivors have picked up on this cultural factor as a way of expressing mass trauma after living through the deadly waves and witnessing horrific scenes in their aftermath. This is a type of mass hallucination, this is a quote, that is a cue to the trauma being suffered by people who are missing so many dead people and seeing so many dead people and only talking about dead people. Thai psychologist and media commentator Wallop Payamanatham said. Mr. Wallop said widespread trauma began to set in about 4 days after the waves hit. So this is really interesting because it's that close to it. But, this is really raw. So translate this back to the Christians.
3 days, right?
Experiencing the death of their because you've got to remember as well, they aren't just experiencing the death of a friend or a family member. They're experiencing the death of the Messiah. Their cult leader that they've been following. This is someone that they've come to really, really love and appreciate in a much more spiritual way.
Right.
So this is when people, again, to continue the quote, this is when people start seeing these foreigners walking on the sand or in the ocean, he said, adding, the sighting started about the same time as people began calling for help, crying, some scared. Many people said they could not escape the smell of death or the sights they had seen while assisting in the crisis, he said. Mr. Wallop said the reason almost all ghost sightings appear to involve foreign tourists stems from a belief that spirits can only be put to rest by relatives at the scene, such as was done by the many Thai victims. Quote, and to finish it, Thai people believe that when people die, a relative has to cremate them or bless them. If this is not done or the body is not found, people believe the person will appear over and over again to show where they are, he said. And neurologist Oliver Sacks, very famous, observes a deeply superstitious and delusional atmosphere can foster hallucinations arising from extreme emotional states, and these can affect entire communities.
It's interesting you mentioned that keynote of like in all of that really stood out is that whole when the body is missing, they believe that the person's going to still come around, float around, and like try to like let them know where the body is in the Thai people's culture. But if Jesus was buried somewhere that in a location where only the political leadership of the Romans who are involved are allowed to go, and they're like, you're not allowed to go here. This is not an honorable burial. You're not allowed to be there where he's buried. So they don't know where he is. They're not sure where his body is. His body's missing. There's an explanation for, missing body. And now he's appearing. I don't, nobody knows, nobody knows for sure exactly how this played out, but it is something to consider, especially with the current Thai example here.
So you've got a whole community of people who are living in superstitious times, especially compared to now, who have gone through all sorts of trauma, who are statistically more likely, from all the data we can gather, statistically more likely to experience hallucinations of varying types. And then we have claims of experiencing I also didn't quote the fact that I did mention this, that actually almost all people in these situations believe they are veridical. So they believe these experiences are actually true. Right. So we have this scenario where they are very likely to have experienced phenomena which they would believe were veridical. Then we have the Christian data, which will include embellishments, but are there going to be nuggets of truth at the beginning? Almost certainly, but because if we believe in the actual execution of Jesus and so on and so forth, then we will expect some of his followers to have had experiences that they believe are veridical, and these would have been, really important to the communities that they were living in. And this is absolutely normal. There's nothing unusual about this. And this goes some way to explaining at least some of the gospel data, the rest being explained by being made up for political reasons or just embellishments, persuasive agendas, legendary embellishment and all that. So you put all of that together and you've got the gospel appearance narratives.
Okay. Now are we getting into the political?
Yep.
Okay.
Yep. So this is just to finish it off, and then go wherever any questions take us. Is there anything else you want to say about sort of visions and hallucinations?
No, I just think that there's probably so much data from different cultures that we could show. Humans believe their experiences are facts, especially when they're visionary or auditory. That takes it to the next level, because you would expect that if you turn on the radio, you're going to hear the radio. You're going to hear a noise. You shouldn't hear anything if there's not something omitting it. So if they're hearing something, it's natural to believe that there's something going on. Just like my light that flickered on the side of the bed on my wife's side of the bed the other night, I automatically thought that one of the kids was tricking me, that one of my kids snuck in the room and was trying to play games with me or something. But then I realized, no, that was way too clever and way too, they wouldn't even go that far to create this. I started going, okay, what the heck is it? Then I started going, I don't know the answer, and immediately thought maybe there's something there. And that's me as a person who doesn't believe. I'm not a believer, but I'm still prone and naturally thinking, could it be? Could it be something? So I start to think that way. And then I went and looked over carefully, said, I'm going to Scooby-Doo this thing. I'm going to go unmask it, see if there's something that can explain this. Because even if I couldn't prove there was a wire there tapping it, there's still possibility, statistically, that electricity, lights sometimes will turn on. There is electricity going to that bulb. If you flick the light switch on, it's on. Could it be something technologically happened that caused it to flicker? You don't think critically like that in the moment. This is stuff that I am able to do. Can you imagine someone who believes this to be true? And it's part of their dogma, their creed, their worldview. They can't let it go.
I've talked about this before in terms of prayer, where, and I don't want to sidetrack here, but one example I wrote in an article is that we had this scenario where I'm obviously going to talk about it now. We had this scenario whereby we had this real problem with our newborn twins, and we were fretting about it all day, and it was actually driving us pretty wild, because I can't remember, it was some issue with them that was causing us a whole heap of problems, and we're like, oh my goodness, how can we solve this? And we're pulling our hair out, and then suddenly the doorbell went, and it's my friends who live up in London, and they were just, we're down visiting relatives. All right. And I haven't seen you for literally years. Come in, let's have a cup of tea. And I was like, oh my goodness, the milk, we've run out of milk. I'll just go to this shop down the road and get some milk. And as I walk down the shop down the road, so this particular time, all these we talk about irreducible complexity in terms of Christianity. It's all these complex sort of scenario variables had to be in place. I walked down the shop, and then this other mother who had twins, who was also going to the shop because she'd run out of milk. So again, all these things had to be in place. And I was like, oh my God, fancy meeting you here. We've got this real problem with our twins, blah, 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 blah. Knowing that she's much more of an expert, she's a couple of years down the line. She's like, oh yeah, you need to do this, 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 this. I was like, this is amazing. Went back, sorted, all fine, right? So then so the reason why this is interesting is because had we been Christian, we would have prayed at that point. We would have got together, put our hands together and said, let's pray to the Lord and see if we can find an answer to this, right? Then the doorbell would have gone, cup of tea,
it's a miracle.
walk down the shop. Oh my goodness, what are the chances? Oh my God, you've got the answer. You've answered our prayers. Walk back, solution.
If
Right?
you were Hindu, if you were Muslim, if you were any other religion, it would have been your God who would have done this. And every religion has these same experiences. So what I did, what my deconversion process started making me realize, this is just a human phenomena, that we, in our perception, in the mind's eye, are perceiving these things and seeing these coincidences, which
Yeah.
almost don't seem coincidental. And
But
then
when
all
you're
of a sudden
praying, 30 times a day, then some of those coincidences are going to be attributed to Jesus, to God.
Right.
You know, it's like, it's just statistics, right?
Yeah.
And so the reason it's only sort of linked to what we're talking about, but you know, when you have certain experiences, you're going to link it, you know, to whatever framework you've got for your lives, and so therefore, you know, people are going to be finding things in reality that aren't really there, and attributing that to God, or attributing this to, you know, oh, that's Jesus, or I've just experienced Jesus in this way, and then this becomes an experience story that gives you authority in a nascent Christian sect where everyone's vying for authority. Now, it's worth, I mentioned this earlier, 1 Corinthians 9. This is the beginning of 1 Corinthians 9. Am I not free? Am I not an apostle? Have I not seen Jesus our Lord? Are you not my work in the Lord? If I'm not an apostle to others, at least I am to you, for you are the seal of my apostleship in the Lord. So here he's using, have I not seen our Lord? Have I not had an experience? Like, this is giving him currency, right? This is giving him authority. So I think is a nice little quote that you could just forget about. It's just that you might just think, oh, whatever. But actually what this tells us is that for him, this is giving him purchase with his audience, with the Corinthians. He's saying, hey, have I not seen the Lord?
Exactly.
Right? You want to listen to me? I know what I'm talking about. So this idea that appearance narratives gives you some kind of, you know, some kind of political currency is really, really, I think, important and needs to be contemplated when we're wondering whether some of these were maybe made up. And Chris Komanitsky, who wrote the brilliant book Doubting Jesus' Resurrection: What Happened in the Black Box, is a really good book, well worth reading. He talks about this. I won't quote you, but he discusses how the political, you know, there's good political reason for some of these early church movers and shakers to come up with the appearance stories of their own, you know, to designate authority, as he talks about.
I mean, look at you know, the apocalypse, if you will. All right. The very first thing, I turned to hear the voice that spoke to me, and sure enough, wouldn't you know it, it's Jesus. And here is Jesus, the resurrected one, you know, that he is seeing the Lord. So the message you're about to hear, you're going to want to really pay attention to, this author's trying to imply. I think having visions of Jesus is an authoritarian. You have authority if you have envisioned him, which might also play a part as to why people forge things in the name of Paul. You know,
yeah, like, someone questioned that earlier, talk about forging. Yeah, but carry on.
No, it just makes me think about this whole potential, like, they know that Paul claimed to be someone who witnessed the resurrected Christ, and therefore, because he had seen Jesus, let's make sure we have him say, hey, women, you know, don't speak in the church by the 2nd century or something. You know, like, are they interpolating things into his name or writing forged letters to validate their particular theological views? You know, it's just something to consider.
So I think what's an interesting, and I end the chapter, and you hadn't got so far as to reading this, but there's a really interesting parallel with the Book of Mormon and the Angel Moroni and Joseph Smith and the Golden Tablets. And what happened is, you know, you have the three witnesses who are they? Someone Harris, Martin Harris, Oliver Cowdery, and David Whitmer. So it was in the latter part of June 1829. Joseph, Oliver Cowdery, and myself were together. This is David Whitmer writing this. And the angel showed them the plates to us, We were sitting on a log when we were overshadowed by a light more glorious than that of the sun. In the midst of this light, but a few feet from us, appeared a table upon which were many golden plates, also the sword of Laban and Laban and the directors. I saw them as plain as I see you now, and distinctly heard the voice of the Lord declaring that the records of the plates of the Book of Mormon were translated by the gift and power of God. So why this is really important is these are three people, the three witnesses, who are staking these claims that this happened, right?
Mm-hmm.
And they seem to be making very veridical claims, like in time and space. This isn't in my head. This is like stuff that's happening here, and this completely validates Joseph Smith's claims, right? So this is why they were then written into the front of the Book of Mormon. The printed part of the book, at the beginning of the Book of Mormon reads, "And we declare with words of soberness that an angel of God came down from heaven, and he brought and laid before our eyes that we beheld and saw the plates and the engravings thereon, and we know that it is by the grace of God the Father and our Lord Jesus Christ that we beheld and bear record that these things are true."
Mm-hmm.
Now, why am I bringing this into play? Because what was really interesting, these people said these are the three witnesses. This is the beginning of a religion or a sect or a cult or whatever. And these are three of the core witnesses. So you could talk about, Peter, James, Paul, whoever. Could it be that Peter, Paul, James, whoever might have been lying?
Yeah.
I mean, do you think that's even remotely?
I definitely think it's possible. I don't rule it out. For me, right, what I think the evidence points to is very superstitious people. I mean, like wonky. When I talk to these other academics, they talk about everywhere. There are archons, demons, demonic powers. There are weird crap everywhere. Paul's seeing all this persecution that's happening to him as a sign that the spirits of the air, the demons, the archons are attacking him. Like I used to think about my Slipknot and Mudvayne and hardcore heavy metal CDs. I burned them when I became like really extreme Christian, and I burned all my Pokemon cards. I had a ton of Charizards, bro. I'd have probably had thousands of dollars, like literally in Pokemon I burned, because they had spirits. I believed that they were really, somehow they were demonic, and there was demons and spirits that were inside of the material things in the world. And like that, if you think that crazy, like I did, it does not take much for me to think they were crazy too.
There's a wonderful quote from a Malawian friend of mine on Facebook the other month. I hope I can do it justice. It was something like, when I was a Christian, like hardcore Christian, I deleted all the secular music on my laptop. I deleted it in the name of Christianity. Now I'm a secular humanist. I keep all my gospel music on my laptop and I enjoy it. And I thought, what a beautiful way of showing how much more tolerant and accepting of it. It's just really nice. Anyway,
I used to do that. I'd burn the stuff, then I'd buy them again when I would like get lukewarm again and like realize like this is too much, I'm going too far. And then I'd come back and I'd do this and come back, and like I would probably spend buying the same stuff over and over again. It's like an addiction, I quit. Okay, hey, what's up, dude? Can you bring me another baggie? Like, like it was just, I'm supposed to delete his number out of my phone, and then you find his number again. Just giving you an analogy, but yeah, I think that's the case. And I still have a YouTube channel where I was a Calvinist. I had the full beard. I was reading John Knox, John Calvin, Martin Luther, all the reformers, getting into that, of course, as a Calvinist. And I kept that YouTube channel up. It's called Derek for God 777, the number 4 and the number 777 3 times. And talk about like, I'm all into the tulip and dealing with the Calvinistic theology and whatnot. But I keep it up there so people can go and see how I really was very into this, but then you are willing to challenge your own thinking. But anyway, that's not the point of the show.
So why do I talk about this Joseph Smith scenario? Because what happened is, so we had these three witnesses. They got written into the Book of Mormon. I think they're still in the Book of Mormon. But however, Harris in 1838 recanted the experience, claiming that it was only a mental vision, and this reality was the same for these signatories. The three witnesses had never seen or handled the golden plates, and this in turn caused 5 very influential members, of which 3 were apostles, to leave the church. In other words, he basically said, yeah, it didn't really happen like that, just sort of mental experiences, and recanted that. But they were the 3 witnesses to this amazing miracle. Now, here's an example of where actually the truth outed to some degree. and someone admitted to kind of lying or embellishing or making stuff up, that was foundational for the create. Now, funnily enough, the LDS, the Mormon Church, has had a greater growth than the Christian church. So when you talk about people like William Lane Craig, like relying on Rodney Stark and other people saying that, one of the arguments for the truth of Christianity is that it grew so quickly, and it wouldn't grow that quickly if it wasn't true. Well, actually, Mooniism and Mormonism grew quicker statistically than Christianity. And in fact, there's a great paper by a guy, Welch, that's John W. Welch, called Early Mormonism and Early Christianity, Some Providential Similarities, where he goes side by side and looks at the similarities in the growth of and in the development of the LDS and Christianity. And it's really, really fascinating, because actually the arguments that people use for the truth of Christianity from the kind of cultural growth of it is completely work for Mormonism and actually Mooniism. But if Christians don't believe in those, then they can't use that argument.
Right. Just like I expect Islam to one day say, well, look, we're the largest religion in the world. That's proof that our religion's true, or some, they're not saying that right now. They're saying we're the fastest growing religion in the world. That's what their claim is now. But then the claim will eventually heighten once they're in the peak of most people who believe in it. It never ends. This is why we need to do what we do. Why we do what we do is to educate people to start seeing through this. Hopefully we can stop that from being the case,
Yeah, so that's kind of like that Mormonism thing is like liars for Jesus, basically, is the analogy there. So this kind of happens. And so when you start looking at the Christian data, you start building up a naturalistic, and I only very loosely went into hallucinations. There's a whole paper on hallucinations of lost visions of grief that I could quote you from, but there's lots more to say on all this kind of visionary, hallucinatory stuff. But I think that we've got really good basis as naturalists to say we can explain this data in terms of A, making stuff up, B, making stuff up because you're lying for Jesus type stuff, making it up for political reasons, but also genuinely having hallucinatory experiences, but those are naturalistically explained. And none of this refers to veridical, objective experiences of a risen Jesus. And then you've got theology as well, writing theology and not history. Right. And I think we can do a really good job of explaining all that data without having to believe what Christians believe.
I just want to say real quick here, give this guy the fame. Derek knows the truth, but denies it anyway. Do you know how silly you sound? Honestly, really, I gotta just call you out on this, because that is honestly, look, thank you for the super chat.
He didn't say that. He said, Derek, you know the truth, but you Dennis it. Oh no, he's changed it.
No, you deny.
Yeah.
Yes. I can't. I mean, it's like, don't you know that, Mormonism's the truth? You're denying. It's true, but you're denying it. You don't understand that Hinduism is true. You are the one who's denying Vishnu in your heart. Don't you realize this? I mean, you are purposely ignoring the true religion. Polytheism goes further back than monotheism. Don't you realize that they're tapped into the original source of where religions came from? It is the truth, my friend. You're denying the truth. Don't you know this? It's silly. It's ridiculous. Anyway, go ahead. So,
the only truth is there's no God. So, just so I finished the chapter with this quote from Raymond Brown, because it's always nice to quote a Christian to kind of say what you want to be said, which is, truth conveyed by drama can at times be more effectively impressed on people's minds than truth conveyed by history. So here you have a Catholic exegete saying, well, if you dramatize your theology, then it's going to have a lot more purchase than actually if you're just telling some historical truths. So you might as well dramatize it. And then you start wondering, well, what's the truth here? Like, are you just making stuff up? I always talk about this with people who say, and Raymond Brown's great for this. I mean, he's an absolutely phenomenal exegete, where he say that with the nativity and with the resurrection. That okay, he will admit that these are historically problematic. Matthew and Luke in the Nativity he thinks are historically problematic, but they are conveying some kind of theological verisimilitude. Yeah, fair enough. What are you hanging that on? So if you're saying there's no historical basis, or the historical basis is thoroughly problematic, then when Matthew's saying he's a Messiah, what's he basing that on if he didn't actually come out of Egypt as the Messiah was prophesied? So therefore, this is just an empty assertion. So you can say that yeah, dramatized theology is going to be much more impressive than a historical claim.
Mm-hmm.
But if you don't have the historical claim to underwrite that, then you've got nothing to hang your theology on, and it's just a castle in the air, and it just fall down.
Yeah, I mean, the whole gospel, I think that's what made Christianity look the way that it is so impressive. Is this literature is written quite well.
Yeah.
So it isn't
symbolism.
Yeah, symbolism. It's loaded with eclectic mimicism, or at least it's aware of multiple cultural backgrounds, and it plays with these texts in interesting ways, which is what makes it so interesting. But I don't know, if we didn't have the Gospels and all we had were Paul's letters, I don't know how famous Christianity would have gone. I don't know how well it would have taken off. I mean, it's speculation, but
you need the stories. I mean, you need the moral teachings, and you need the really memorable stories. I mean, the Good Samaritan, everyone knows that, and you need, prodigal son, the Good Samaritan, all these. This is what is attractive stuff, because actually some of it's decent moral teaching, thrown in with a few problematic pieces, but I think if you just had Paul and you just have Jesus as being an atonement for sins, then I don't think you have enough content to drive a religion.
Well, thank you, Jonathan. This has been a blast. Is there anyone who had any questions before we go? I just want to make sure I get those as we're on our way out. Make sure, while we wait real quick here, I want to get everybody aware. These are his books. So if you go to Amazon.com, let me make this a little bit bigger, fill up the screen a little. Did that fill it up? Yeah.
Yeah, a little bit.
So go to Amazon, look up his book, The Resurrection, a critical examination of the Easter story. Be sure to get you a copy. I've got me a copy here. I really enjoy it. It's full of information. You can, like one of our super chats earlier, you can keep going back and glean. You'll find a lot of interesting material there that you can use to show, no, this isn't the case. There's good reasons to be highly suspicious of the story. Oh, someone said, just got here. We'll watch later. Did I miss the part about the zombies?
Vaguely agnostic is brilliant. Is a great supporter. So that's awesome. Thanks.
Yeah, always coming through with the sacred holy number 666. Hallelujah. Thank you so much for the $6.66. I really do appreciate you always coming through with the super chat and showing love. Please go.
If I was going to say, if anyone wants to show some extra love, as I say, this book's out this week. It's 30 Arguments Against the Existence of God, Heaven, Hell, Satan, and Divine Design. I'd love to speak to you at some point on some of these arguments. Derek, I've talked to you a little bit about a couple of hell arguments on one of our previous videos, but that's definitely, it's in paperback now, and it'll be in ebook format in a couple of weeks.
Absolutely. Look, I need to get that, read it. We have other books of yours, of course, up here. And then, of course, when you have right there in your hands that we're going to get on Amazon, I need to get a copy of that. Also, go check out his website, onlysky.media.
Yeah. Well, it's not my website, but I am a contributor. I'm a feature writer and columnist.
Got it. Well, rock on. Go check him out. Join that. I have the Patreon. Please consider joining that, as our good friend Robert Heron said in the chat. I really appreciate that. Go join my Patreon. I'm constantly doing new work. You can write me messages, personal, private messages. Even if you're not a believer, or you're not a person who believes like me, you're not a skeptic and you're a believer. I have a lot of Christians, believe it or not, and others who are on there and they say, please don't mention my name publicly. I really like what you do and the education that you bring. we differ on conclusions, but really love what you do. And I can't sit back and not want to support and be able to get the background, but I want to be able to ask you questions from time to time. And that actually happens. I have Christians who support me. So therefore, people watching are going to go, he's secretly Zionist supporter, secret Christian. No.
Have you ever had a Christian sort of say, "Thank you, you helped in my deconversion process"?
Yes, but I've also had Christians say, "Thank you, you've strengthened my faith."
Bang.
Yeah, no, I'm not kidding. In fact, I'm going to read you something in just a second here, but real quick, I want to address one of the comments here. Brett Forsyth. Thank you, Brett, for the comment. Get Jason DaCosta, I think he's talking about, to do a debate. So Jason won't do a debate, and Jason DaCosta won't even do an episode with me where I'm actually being critical of Israel only. So I definitely think Israel only is wrong as you can get. I've been probing this deep. Like, if you really want to understand this, just be on the lookout. I got more material coming out showing why that's not the case. He won't come on. He definitely won't debate, but I don't debate. But he won't come on for conversation. He won't, do a show to conversate with other people and do these things. I've had a show with him in the past, but it was like, let him discuss Israel only. Today, I'd be more than happy to have a critical conversation about it. He just won't do it. I have texted him, I have his personal cell phone number. So it just ain't going to happen, my friend. But I want to read you an email that I found was amazing. And this is what a person said. Hi, Derek and MythVision team. I think they thought maybe when they email me, they think they're getting a team. I'm a one-man army right now, unless my wife finds the email. First of all, I want to thank you for your work. I remember back when I was a full-blown fundamentalist Christian almost 3 years ago, and rather well-versed in apologetics and creationist apologetics in particular. Any doubts I had were easily dismissed, the truth being on my side, and anything opposing this truth had to be coming from the devil. Yet I had this reoccurring thought that kept nagging me. If the truth is as obvious as I believe it is, why aren't more people finding and accepting it? What do they have to say for themselves? So, to figure this out, I plopped myself on my couch and opened YouTube and listened some more. Hours on end. It started with Richard Dawkins, and through autoplay discovered a demonic figure attacking arks and Edens, while ominous clouds rolled by, talented debaters demonstrating above all else that theists have no evidence to bring, and even cartoon figures easily picking apart what I thought rock solid. I was getting really annoyed that they were actually making a whole lot of sense. If these really are the voices of Satan, it was looking like honesty and sincerity were not godly attributes at all. It took me a while to actually find MythVision. It seems to still be in a deeper corner of the internet. You and the scholars you bring to the show have been most instrumental in helping me deconstruct. Not only do you show how ridiculous these beliefs are, you also show why they exist and where they came from, and stones aren't being left unturned. I also love how the beauty of all this history shines even brighter in my eyes through your podcasts. Keep up the good work. I'm looking forward to listening to many more hours of these fascinating scholars. I feel as though I'm sitting beside a giant pile of rubble left from what used to stand tall in my mind. This was kind of devastating at first, but I'm looking forward to building something new, and this time, as in the parable, starting by making sure that it isn't sand.
Wow.
And I'm not going to name names because I don't do that to people, but it moves me to hear those kind of testimonials from people that are like, you don't understand what you've done with this program. I have taken that journey along with the viewer. These scholars have done what she is describing is exactly what happened to me while sitting behind this screen. So when people talk about Derek, he's an idiot. And some podcasts, when you go back, I was literally pronouncing Septuagint. I didn't even know the L was silent. I'm learning. I'm just a guy who's learning. I don't pretend to have all these answers, but I know academics, and I want to tap into people who do understand these things.
I don't think there is an L in it. There's not even an L in it.
It's silent, though. Yeah, it would be silent, isn't there?
There's not an L. It's Septuagint.
Well, I always said Septuagint.
Well, yeah. Maybe you had tulips on your mind.
Yeah, I could be wrong with that.
You see, you reminded me.
Yeah. No L, and I was saying Septuagint. So I'm learning. It's a process, but I can tell you one thing: where I was at as a Christian who had all this locked in apologetics to figure these things out. Bible interprets the Bible. I was practically a presuppositionalist because I knew that I needed to start it with the Bible was true. Because if you start with evidentialism, you're going to end up in some wonky philosophical position because you're trying to go to philosophy rather than the text.
Well, I just think I think there are I mean, that whole new book, I won't show it again, but that whole book to me shows that, right, belief in God is just nuts. It doesn't make sense, or at least the classical theistic version of God, which is omni, that God just can't exist. And then you got the free will debate. So if I was debating William Lane Craig, I think I'd just start with free will. Like, if you can't show me how libertarian free will works, then you can jog on, because your whole judgmental God depends on this, right? Yeah. And then we can get to divine foreknowledge and how do you get heaven and hell, and creating people just to go to hell or heaven. You know who's going to do that from up front, and blah blah blah. And like, none of this makes sense. Yeah. And then we're not even getting onto the nativity, resurrection, and Christianity. I mean, just the whole slew of arguments that show that the classical theistic version of God can't work, just can't work, especially with divine foreknowledge. And then, so we could, but I love the fact that we can have all these different arguments. So we've just spent a whole, couple of hours talking about the appearance claims in the Gospels, but it's all, for as far as I'm concerned, it's all completely irrelevant, because you can't even get God. Like, you can't even get omni-God. So all of this is just window dressing, but it's thoroughly fascinating. And if I wasn't so interested, I wouldn't have written a big book on it. But it's just for me, atheism is a solid wall, and I'm really confident in it, because from every single direction, it seems inescapable.
Yeah, I definitely want to read that book you have, Why I'm Atheist and Not a Theist. I want to read that. Brett, specifically, email me, Derek@mythvisionpodcast.com or mythvisionpodcast@gmail.com. Down below in the description, there's my email. Email me. I'd be happy to give you my reasons for why I don't think IO is the case. And so X Music says, saying you don't buy Israel only as an atheist is redundant, isn't it? No, specifically, it's a theological position. So it's not an ontological one. It's one arguing that what is going on in the New Testament, what is going on biblically in these particular things. So I don't buy that the Gentiles in Paul's day are actual ethnic apostate Israelites in any sense. I don't think that Paul believed that these were apostate Jews or apostate northern Israelites in any sense. I think Paul realized these were pagans. These were non-Jews. These were not Israelites. And I can explain all that and further. I'm doing episodes that actually go deeper into that, so that you're aware. Anyway, sorry, that has nothing to do with what we talked about, Jonathan. I just want to make mention to the audience while I had on there. I haven't done a live in a few days, but looking forward to your upcoming book. And did I miss anything on the outro? I do have the GoFundMe if you want to help support that, to go to Israel. I also have that link to the origin and meaning.
Are you going to Israel only?
I am going to Israel.
Or anywhere else? That was my joke. Sorry.
Yeah, I know, right? Israel only. I am going to Israel in October. Yeah. So email me, please, if you're trying to get in contact with me, and consider joining the Patreon. You can also ask questions there. It's like a messenger type thing. So there is that link to Vidar that Neil wrote about the Genesis connection.
Well worth looking. Yeah, well worth looking at. Loads of connections, loads of intertextuality there. But no, thank you, Derek. It's been hopefully it's been edifying to the audience. I do apologize that my laptop just had kittens at the beginning. What are the chances? It hasn't done that for like a month, and then let's do a live. Oh, okay, brilliant. So sorry about that. But hey, you got me in almost HD for the rest of it.
Hey, I mean, that's what counts.
Who could complain?
We were having a spiritual battle at the beginning. Yeah. It looks like the Prince of Persia lost.
We won.
Yeah, we won. Michael, he came just in time. We've fasted for 21 days, and he finally shows up, just in time. We almost died, in fact.
Yeah, true that.
So anyway, we're going to check out Naked Jesus on our way out. Please check out the description below, and thank you so much.
Check out his holy hands.
Absolutely, and never forget, we are MythVision.